I held a piece of paper worth $42 million in my trembling hand while my own sister threatened to have me thrown out on the street. I could have ended their financial struggles with a single phone call, but instead I chose to stay completely silent. I wanted to see who actually loved me when they thought I had absolutely nothing. What I discovered changed our family forever and forced me to walk away from the people who shared my blood. My name is Naomi. I am 35 years old, and I have spent my entire adult life being the unpaid servant to my own family. The kitchen of the rented luxury mansion was suffocatingly hot, smelling of expensive truffles and my own nervous sweat. I had been on my feet for 14 hours straight, coordinating my sister Kendra and her husband Jamal's lavish 5th anniversary party for absolutely free. The swinging kitchen doors suddenly slammed open. Jamal marched in with his custom-tailored tuxedo looking furious. He walked straight up to me and violently shoved a crumpled piece of paper directly into my chest. "The caterer needs his $8,000 right now, Naomi," he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. "You planned this disaster, so you need to fix it. Hand over your credit card right now. If you embarrass me in front of my real estate investors tonight, I swear I will tell your mother you ruined our special night on purpose." I stared at the invoice, feeling the blood drain from my face. "Jamal, you know my cards are maxed out," I whispered, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "I bought all the floral arrangements and the centerpieces out of my own pocket just like you asked. I do not have $8,000. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to deal with entitled family members who treat you like a burden. Trust me, you will want to stick around to hear exactly how I turned the tables on them. Right on cue, Kendra pushed through the kitchen doors. At 32 years old, my sister was the family golden child, playing the role of a highly successful luxury lifestyle influencer. She was dripping in diamond jewelry that I knew Jamal had purchased on credit. Kendra looked me up and down with absolute disgust, taking in my stained black catering uniform and my exhausted face. "Oh, please, Naomi, do not start crying and playing the victim," Kendra sneered, crossing her arms. "Jamal is right. You are a freelance event planner, and you begged us for the exposure this party would bring. The least you can do is cover the food. Or are you too worried about saving up pennies to fix that embarrassing 15-year-old Honda you parked out back? It is leaking oil on the driveway of a $10,000 a night rental." I swallowed hard, fighting the lump in my throat. "Kendra, please, I am facing eviction next week. My landlord just gave me the final warning. You know I cannot take on any more of your debt. I just need you to pay the vendor so I can go home." Kendra laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that echoed off the stainless steel appliances. "Home," she mocked. "You mean that tiny rundown apartment you are about to get kicked out of? Look at yourself, Naomi. You are 35 and completely broke. Maybe if you worked a real corporate job instead of begging for scraps, you would not be in this pathetic situation. Hand Jamal the card, or I am calling Mom and telling her you are trying to sabotage my marriage out of sheer jealousy." The threat of calling our mother Brenda was always their ultimate weapon. Brenda worshipped the ground Kendra walked on and viewed my financial struggles as a personal embarrassment to the family name. Whenever Kendra complained about me, my mother would freeze me out for months. I took a deep breath, handed Jamal my only emergency credit card, and prayed it would not decline. Jamal snatched it from my hand, swiped it on the caterer's tablet, and threw the card back at me. It bounced off my shoulder and clattered onto the tile floor. "Clean up this mess in the kitchen and then leave through the back door," Jamal ordered, turning his back on me. "We do not need our guests seeing you looking like trash." I picked up my card from the floor and walked out the back door into the cool night air. The heavy bass of the party music faded as I walked past a line of luxury cars, feeling smaller and more worthless than I ever had in my life. I reached my rusted 2009 Honda, unlocked the creaking door, and collapsed into the driver's seat. The tears finally spilled over. I hit my steering wheel in sheer frustration, screaming into the empty car. My phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I pulled it out, expecting another cruel text from Kendra. Instead, it was an automated email from my landlord. Final notice of eviction proceedings. Please vacate the premises by Tuesday. I dropped the phone into my lap and buried my face in my hands. I was completely out of options. Out of desperation, I reached into my purse to find a tissue, but my fingers brushed against a small rectangular piece of cardboard. It was the Mega Millions lottery ticket I had purchased at a gas station the day before. I had bought it on a whim using the last $5 in my wallet. Feeling completely numb, I picked up my phone, opened the browser, and typed in the lottery website. The drawing had happened 2 hours ago, right while I was setting up Kendra's champagne tower. The numbers loaded on the screen. 4, 11, 23, 33, 49, Megaball 22. I looked at my ticket. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, thinking the exhaustion was making me hallucinate. I read the numbers again out loud. 4, 11, 23, 33, 49, Megaball 22. I refreshed the page. The numbers stayed the same. The estimated jackpot was $42 million. My breathing stopped. The suffocating weight of my debt, my impending eviction, and my family's relentless cruelty seemed to suspend in midair. I held the winning ticket up to the dim dome light of my car. All the numbers matched. I had just won $42 million. Most people would have screamed. Most people would have burst out of that car run right back into that lavish mansion and shoved that ticket right in Jamal's arrogant face. They would have laughed at Kendra and told everyone they were rich. But as I sat there in the dark, a cold, calculating calmness washed over me, completely replacing the panic I had felt moments before. I looked through my windshield toward the brightly lit mansion where my sister and brother-in-law were drinking expensive champagne paid for by my maxed-out credit card. They had just treated me like dirt on their shoe. They knew I was facing homelessness, and their only concern was protecting their fake wealthy image. If I told them about the money right now, they would instantly change their tune. Kendra would suddenly call me her best friend. Jamal would suddenly pitch me his shady real estate investments. My mother would suddenly remember she had 2 daughters. They would drain me dry and claim they deserved every penny. I carefully folded the lottery ticket and slipped it securely behind the protective case of my cell phone. I wiped the tears off my face and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I did not see a broken victim anymore. I saw a woman holding all the power in the world. I decided right then and there that I was not going to tell a single soul about the jackpot. Not yet. First, I was going to test them. I was going to give my family one final opportunity to show me who they truly were when my back was against the wall. I opened my car door and started walking back toward the lights of the mansion, ready to put my plan into action. I walked back into the house through the heavy oak double doors. The air conditioning hit my face, but my blood was running hot. I could hear the clinking of crystal glasses and the booming laughter coming from the formal dining room. I followed the sound and stood in the arched doorway. My family was seated around a massive mahogany table feasting on buttered lobster tail and expensive champagne. They looked like a picture-perfect wealthy family, but I knew the ugly truth hiding underneath. I walked over to the sound system panel on the wall and pressed the power button. The soft jazz music instantly cut off, leaving a heavy silence in the room. Jamal stopped mid-laugh, his fork halfway to his mouth. Kendra glared at me from across the table, her diamond necklace catching the chandelier light. My mother Brenda sat at the head of the table, sipping her wine with a look of supreme annoyance. "What are you doing, Naomi?" my mother snapped, setting her glass down. "We are in the middle of a toast, and you look completely unhinged. Go back to the kitchen and finish cleaning." I did not move. I looked directly into my mother's eyes and spoke with a calm, steady voice that surprised even me. "I am being evicted on Tuesday, Mom. My landlord just sent the final notice. I have completely drained my savings paying for the deposits on this anniversary party because Jamal promised he would reimburse me before the event. He did not. Now I have nowhere to go. I need a loan of $2,000 just to keep a roof over my head. I will sign a contract and pay you back with interest by the end of the month." The silence that followed was suffocating. I watched their faces closely, waiting for even a flicker of empathy. Instead, my mother let out a sharp, condescending sigh. She picked up her linen napkin and dabbed the corners of her mouth. Naomi, please do not do this right now, my mother said, her tone dripping with disappointment. You always find a way to make Kendra's special moments about your own failures. Your sister just ordered a custom $90,000 Porsche this morning. Do you have any idea how much capital Jamal has tied up in his new real estate developments? We simply do not have liquid cash sitting around to fund a freelance party planner's poor life choices. I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. You do not have $2,000? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Mom, you are wearing a $5,000 Cartier watch that Jamal bought you for Christmas. Kendra is wearing earrings that cost more than my entire car. I am your daughter, and I am telling you I am going to be sleeping on the street in 3 days. Kendra slammed her hands on the table. Do not try to guilt-trip Mom just because you are a loser, Naomi, she yelled. You chose to be a freelancer. You chose to live in that pathetic apartment. I built my brand from the ground up. I worked hard to get where I am. We are not a charity. If you need money so badly, go get a second job at a fast food restaurant. The sheer audacity of her words almost made me laugh. Kendra had never worked a hard day in her life. Her entire luxury influencer brand was funded by Jamal's shady money. But I kept my face perfectly blank, pressing my phone against my leg, feeling the solid outline of the $42 million ticket hidden in the case. Jamal leaned back in his leather dining chair, a cruel smirk spreading across his face. He reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a thick gold money clip. He peeled off 3 crisp $100 bills. Then he reached for his half-full glass of red wine and intentionally tipped it over. The dark red liquid spilled across the pristine white tablecloth and dripped onto the expensive hardwood floor, pooling at my feet. Jamal dropped the $300 directly into the puddle of spilled wine. The bills instantly soaked up the red liquid. There is your loan, Naomi, Jamal said, his voice oozing with arrogant satisfaction. Clean up the floor, grab a mop, and scrub the kitchen. Do a good job, and the $300 is yours. Consider it a charitable donation from my family to you. Just make sure you leave through the back door when you are done. My mother did not say a word. She just took another sip of her champagne and looked away as if I was a stray dog that had wandered into her house. Kendra was openly laughing, pulling out her phone to text someone, probably making fun of me to her fake wealthy friends. They expected me to cry. They expected me to drop to my knees, grab the soaking wet money, and beg them for forgiveness. They thrived on my humiliation. Instead, I looked down at the ruined money and then back up at Jamal. A genuine, relaxed smile spread across my face. It was the kind of smile you give when you realize you have already won the war. Keep it, Jamal, I said softly. It looks like you are going to need it a lot more than I do. I did not wait for his reaction. I turned around and walked straight out the front door of the mansion, leaving them sitting in their own toxic waste. I stepped out into the cool night air and walked toward my rusted car. I did not feel sad anymore. I did not feel rejected. I felt completely, entirely free. The next morning, I called in sick to my only other catering gig and drove straight to the financial district downtown. I walked into the lobby of the most prestigious wealth management law firm in the city. My faded jeans and scuffed sneakers drew some looks from the receptionists, but when I calmly told them I needed to establish a blind trust to claim a multi-million-dollar lottery prize, I was immediately escorted into a private glass-walled conference room. Within 2 hours, I had signed the paperwork to create an entity called the Phoenix Trust. My legal team was instructed to claim the $42 million jackpot entirely anonymously. To the public eye, the winner was just a faceless corporation. To my family, I was still the pathetic broke sister who was about to be homeless. I needed to make sure they kept believing that. If I suddenly showed up in a new car, they would know something was up. So I spent the rest of the weekend actually packing up my tiny apartment. I rented the cheapest, rustiest storage unit I could find on the edge of town and moved all my furniture into it. I filled the back seat of my Honda with a few garbage bags full of my clothes and a thin blanket, making it look exactly like someone who was living out of their vehicle. On Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Kendra. I let it ring 3 times before I answered, making my voice sound tired and defeated. "Hello," I answered. "Naomi, it is Kendra." She sounded overly sweet, which immediately put me on high alert. "Listen, Mom told me about the eviction today. We were a little harsh the other night at the party. I talked to Jamal and we decided we want to help you out. We have a lot of extra space in the house. You can sleep on the floor of our home gym until you get back on your feet." I knew Kendra better than anyone. She never did anything out of the goodness of her heart. There was always a catch. "Thank you, Kendra," I said, keeping my voice low. "That is really generous. What do you need me to do?" "Well," she hesitated, pausing just long enough to make it obvious. "Since Jamal is being so generous taking you in, he needs a tiny favor in return. You know that old run-down house Grandma left to both of us? The one sitting on that empty lot. Jamal has a big developer who wants to buy the land and build luxury condos, but he cannot move forward because your name is still on the deed. If you come down to the notary office and sign over your 50% to Jamal today, he will let you stay in the gym. It is a win-win, Naomi." There it was, the extortion. They were literally trying to steal my only remaining asset, an inheritance from our grandmother, in exchange for letting me sleep on a gym floor. "Okay, Kendra," I said, forcing a slight tremble into my voice. "Text me the address of the notary. I will be there in an hour." I hung up the phone and smiled. I had just the ammunition I needed. I dialed the direct number to my new lead wealth manager. "Hi, this is Naomi," I said as soon as he answered. "I need you to order a full microscopic financial audit of my brother-in-law's real estate development company. Look into every loan, every mortgage, and every business partner he has. I want to know exactly how much debt he is hiding and who owns it. Dig up everything right now." I got in my car and drove toward the notary office, ready to play the perfect victim one last time. The crunch of the gravel under my worn-out sneakers seemed deafening as I walked back toward the brilliantly lit rented mansion. Just minutes ago, I had run out of that kitchen feeling like a complete failure, a 35-year-old woman drowning in debt and facing imminent homelessness. Now, with the winning $42 million Mega Millions ticket securely tucked behind my phone case, my entire reality had shifted. The panic that had been suffocating me was entirely gone. In its place was a cold, sharp clarity. I was about to walk back into a lion den, but for the first time in my life, I was the one holding the loaded weapon. I bypassed the main ballroom where the party guests were mingling and drinking the top-shelf liquor I had been forced to source for free. I made my way down the wide marble hallway toward the formal dining room. This was where the immediate family always retreated to eat the premium catering before anyone else, leaving the regular guests with the standard appetizers. As I approached the heavy oak double doors, I could hear the booming sound of Jamal laughing and the unmistakable clinking of expensive crystal champagne flutes. I pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The dining room was suffocatingly opulent. A massive mahogany table sat in the center of the room, beneath a glittering crystal chandelier. The air smelled of roasted garlic herb butter and pure excess. My mother, Brenda, sat at the head of the table, holding court like a queen. She was wearing a tailored silk dress and a diamond tennis bracelet that caught the light every time she moved her hands. To her right sat my sister Kendra, looking flawless and incredibly smug in a designer gown. Jamal was leaning back in his leather chair, holding a glass of vintage champagne. They were feasting on buttered lobster tails and prime rib. The exact food I had spent the last 3 weeks agonizing over, trying to get the caterer to agree to a payment plan that Jamal had ultimately forced onto my maxed-out credit card. Nobody noticed me at first. They were too busy celebrating their own fake wealth. I walked over to the wall panel and pressed the power button for the surround sound system. The soft background jazz music instantly cut off. The sudden heavy silence sucked the air right out of the room. Jamal stopped his story mid-sentence, his fork freezing halfway to his mouth. Kendra snapped her head toward me, her perfect smile instantly transforming into a vicious scowl. My mother Brenda slowly lowered her champagne flute and looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated annoyance. She looked at my stained catering uniform and sighed, as if my mere presence was a stain on her perfect evening. "What in the world are you doing, Naomi?" my mother demanded, her voice sharp and condescending. "We are in the middle of a private toast. If you are done cleaning up the mess you made in the kitchen, you can leave through the side door. You look completely disheveled, and I do not want the investors seeing you like this." I did not shrink back. I did not apologize. I simply stood at the end of the long mahogany table and looked at the three of them. I felt the solid rectangular outline of the lottery ticket pressing against my leg through my pocket. "I am being evicted." "Mom," I said. My voice was completely steady, echoing slightly in the large dining room. Kendra rolled her eyes dramatically and let out a loud groan. "Oh my God, Naomi, are we really doing this right now?" she complained, throwing her hands up. "It is my 5th wedding anniversary. Can you go one single night without making everything a miserable pity party about your pathetic life?" I kept my eyes locked on my mother, ignoring Kendra completely. "I received the final notice from my landlord 20 minutes ago." I continued, keeping my tone completely factual. "I have entirely drained my savings account and maxed out my only emergency credit card paying the vendor deposits for this party tonight. Jamal promised me he would wire the reimbursement funds to my account last week, but he never did. Because of that, I missed my rent payment. The sheriff is coming to lock my doors on Tuesday morning. I have absolutely nowhere to go." My mother stared at me. I searched her eyes, looking for even a tiny flicker of maternal concern. I looked for a hint of worry, a sign that the woman who gave birth to me actually cared that her oldest daughter was about to be sleeping on the streets. There was absolutely nothing, only a cold, calculating judgment. "And what exactly do you expect me to do about it, Naomi?" she asked, crossing her arms over her silk dress. I swallowed my pride, playing my role in this test perfectly. "I need a loan of $2,000, Mom," I said. "Just enough to cover the back rent and the late fees so I do not lose my apartment. I will write up a legally binding contract. I will pay you back with interest by the end of the month. I just need a little help to keep a roof over my head." The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Jamal let out a low, mocking chuckle, taking a slow sip of his champagne. Kendra leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, her diamond earrings swinging. "Alone," Kendra scoffed, shaking her head. "You want us to hand over $2,000 to a freelance party planner who cannot even manage her own basic bills. You chose this life, Naomi. You chose to reject the corporate world. You chose to live in that rundown neighborhood. And now you want us to bail you out because you are a failure." I looked at Kendra, taking in her designer gown and the massive diamond ring on her finger. "Kendra, you literally just posted a video this morning bragging about the new $90,000 custom Porsche you ordered," I said, keeping my voice eerily calm. "Jamal is wearing a tuxedo that costs more than my entire month's rent. I am not asking for a handout. I am asking my family for a temporary lifeline." My mother slammed her hand down on the table, making the crystal glasses rattle. "That is quite enough, Naomi," she barked, her eyes flashing with anger. "Do not you dare sit there and count your sister's money. Kendra has built a highly successful luxury lifestyle brand from the ground up. She works tirelessly for her image. You have absolutely no right to try and guilt-trip her just because you refuse to get a real job." "But Mom," I pushed gently, waiting to see just how deep their cruelty went. "You know I have been working 14-hour days setting up this event for them for free. I am family. Does that not mean anything?" My mother let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Family does not mean we are your personal bank account, Naomi. We simply do not have liquid cash sitting around to throw away on your poor life choices." All of Jamal's capital is currently tied up in his new commercial real estate developments. The money they spend on their lifestyle is an investment in their brand. Giving you $2,000 to throw into a rented apartment is a completely dead investment. A dead investment. That was exactly how my own mother viewed me. I was not a daughter in trouble. I was a bad financial portfolio. I stood there absorbing her words, letting the absolute toxicity of her statement wash over me. I felt no urge to cry. The lottery ticket in my pocket was like a shield of armor protecting my heart from the final devastating blow of my mother's rejection. They had just sealed their own fate, and they had absolutely no idea. I stood frozen at the edge of the dining room, letting the silence stretch. My mother reached for her crystal glass again, taking a slow, deliberate sip of champagne. She did not look at me with pity. She looked at me with profound embarrassment, as if my financial struggles were a personal insult to her carefully curated image. "You are 35 years old, Naomi." My mother continued, her voice lowering to that dangerous quiet tone she used when she was truly disgusted. "And you are standing in a $10,000 a night rental, begging your younger sister for pocket change. Do you have any idea how pathetic that is?" I did not break eye contact. "I am asking for help from my family, Mom," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. "The kind of help parents give their children when they hit rock bottom." My mother scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound that cut through the quiet room. "Do not play the victim card with me," she snapped, setting her glass down so hard the liquid sloshed over the rim. "You hit rock bottom because you dug the hole yourself. I paid for your tuition at a top-tier business program. You could have been a corporate executive making six figures by now. Instead, you threw it all away to plan community center bake sales and freelance parties. You chose to be poor." Kendra leaned forward, a vicious smile playing on her lips. "Exactly, Mom," Kendra chimed in, pointing a manicured finger at me. "I took the opportunities this family gave me and I built an empire. My lifestyle brand has 500,000 followers. Jamal and I are closing on a massive commercial plaza next month. We generate wealth. We bring prestige to this family. You just drain it." I looked at Kendra, wrapped in her designer gown and dripping in diamonds that I knew for a fact were bought on high-interest credit cards. Her entire life was a house of cards waiting to collapse under the weight of Jamal's predatory loans. But my mother worshipped that house of cards because it looked shiny from the outside. "It is about return on investment, Naomi," my mother said, folding her hands elegantly on the table. When I look at Kendra, I see absolute success. I see a daughter who understood the assignment. She just customized a $90,000 Porsche because she earned it. When I look at you, I see a woman who refuses to grow up. Giving you money is like throwing cash into a fire. It does not help you, and it only burns us. The cruelty of her words echoed in the large dining room. She was practically reading from a script she had rehearsed her entire life. Growing up, love in our house was never unconditional. It was a currency. You earned my mother's affection through status, through expensive gifts, through making her look good in front of her wealthy country club friends. For years, I had desperately tried to win her approval. I remembered when I was 25 and landed my first big event planning contract for a local charity. I was so proud. I bought her a beautiful bouquet of flowers and took her to lunch to celebrate. She spent the entire lunch looking at her phone and talking about how Kendra had just started dating a junior investment banker. My achievements were always completely invisible to her unless they came with a massive salary attached. I had spent a decade chasing a mother's love that did not actually exist. "So my worth as your daughter is entirely dependent on my bank account?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the massive room. I just wanted to hear her say it out loud. I wanted the final verbal confirmation before I completely severed the emotional ties holding me to this toxic family. My mother looked me up and down, taking in my worn-out sneakers and my stained black catering apron. "In the real world, Naomi, respect is earned through financial success," she said coldly, without a single ounce of hesitation. "You bring absolutely nothing to this table. You are an embarrassment to me, and you are a heavy burden to your sister." Kendra laughed, taking a piece of lobster meat from her plate and dipping it into the warm herb butter. "Honestly, Naomi, you should be thanking us," Kendra said, chewing slowly. "We are doing you a massive favor. If we bail you out, you will never learn how to survive on your own. It is called tough love. Go sleep in your car for a few nights. Maybe the cold will motivate you to finally get a real job instead of begging for our hard-earned money. The absolute audacity of her statement made my blood run completely cold. Hard-earned money. Kendra had never worked a 40-hour week in her life. She spent her days unboxing free promotional packages and swiping Jamal's credit cards to maintain her influencer aesthetic. Meanwhile, I had been on my feet for 14 hours straight, doing heavy manual labor, just to make sure her perfect anniversary party did not fall apart. I turned my gaze to Jamal. He had been sitting quietly the entire time watching the exchange like it was a free television show. He loved seeing me humiliated. He thrived on the sick power dynamic. He knew I had maxed out my credit cards for his party, and he knew he had deliberately withheld the reimbursement money just to watch me squirm and beg. Jamal, I said, addressing him directly for the first time since I walked into the dining room. You owe me exactly $8,400 for the vendors tonight. If you just pay me back what you legally owe me for the catering and the floral arrangements, I will not need a loan from anyone. I can pay my rent and I will walk out of here right now. Jamal raised an eyebrow, feigning total innocence. What vendor money, Naomi? He asked, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about. You offered to host this party as a gift for our anniversary. You literally begged us to let you coordinate it for your sad little portfolio. I stared at him in pure disbelief. I have the emails, Jamal, I said, my voice tightening as the absolute betrayal set in. I have the signed invoices. My mother slammed her hand on the mahogany table, making the silver cutlery rattle. Stop it right now, Naomi, she ordered, her face flushing with intense anger. Do not, you dare try to extort your brother-in-law just because your pathetic little sob story did not work on me. Jamal has been incredibly generous, allowing you to even be inside this house tonight. You are acting like a desperate leech. A desperate leech. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Any lingering hope I had that my mother might harbor a shred of maternal instinct was instantly obliterated. She was entirely willing to watch me become homeless rather than admit her golden child and his wealthy facade were anything less than perfect. She was actively choosing their fake money over my actual survival. I slowly nodded, feeling the rigid edge of the lottery ticket pressing securely against my leg inside my pocket. It was the only thing keeping me anchored, keeping me from lunging across the table and screaming at them. They thought they had backed me into a dark corner. They thought they had finally broken my spirit for good. They had absolutely no idea that they were currently digging their own financial graves with every single cruel word they spoke. Okay, Mom, I said softly, my voice completely drained of all emotion. I understand perfectly. I will not ask you for anything ever again. The silence in the dining room was absolute after I spoke those words. I had just verbally surrendered. In their eyes, I had finally accepted my place at the absolute bottom of our family hierarchy. Kendra leaned back in her chair with a satisfied sigh as if she had just won a hard-fought marathon. My mother nodded once, a sharp, jerky motion that signaled the conversation was officially over, and she could go back to enjoying her prime rib. But Jamal was not finished. He never was. Jamal was the kind of man who did not just want to win an argument. He wanted to entirely humiliate his opponent, so they would never dare to challenge him again. Jamal let out a low, rumbling laugh that echoed off the crystal chandelier above us. He swirled the remaining vintage red wine in his glass, watching the dark liquid coat the crystal. You always give up so easily, Naomi, he said, shaking his head in mock pity. That is exactly why you are broke. You have absolutely no hustle, no drive. You come in here crying about getting kicked out of your little apartment, but you are not actually willing to do what it takes to survive. You just want a handout from people who actually grind for their wealth. I stood completely still, watching him play his role as the wealthy patriarch. He loved this. He fed off the power dynamic. He wanted to break me down in front of my own mother and sister, to prove his dominance in the room. He needed to make sure I knew exactly how small and insignificant I was compared to his flashy real estate empire. Jamal reached into the inner breast pocket of his custom-tailored tuxedo jacket. He pulled out a thick, heavy gold money clip. It was gaudy and ostentatious, exactly the kind of accessory a man who built his wealth on predatory loans would carry. He snapped the clip open and slowly, deliberately peeled off 3 crisp $100 bills. He held them up between his fingers, letting the light catch the fresh green paper. "I will tell you what Naomi," Jamal said, his voice dropping to a smooth, arrogant purr. "I am a generous guy. It is my anniversary, and I am in a charitable mood." Without breaking eye contact with me, Jamal slowly tilted his crystal wine glass to the side. The dark red vintage wine poured over the rim, splashing onto the pristine white linen tablecloth and dripping down onto the expensive hardwood floor. It formed a dark spreading puddle right near the tip of my worn-out sneakers. Then he opened his fingers and dropped the $300 directly into the center of the spilled wine. The crisp bills hit the liquid and immediately began to absorb the dark red stain. "Clean up the floor," Jamal ordered, pointing at the mess. "Grab a mop, scrub the kitchen until it shines, and the $300 is yours. Consider it charity to keep you off the streets for a few more days. Just make sure you leave through the back door when you are done. We do not want you ruining the aesthetic for our real guests." My mother did not gasp. She did not intervene. She simply picked up her linen napkin and dabbed the corners of her mouth, pretending she had not just watched her son-in-law treat her oldest daughter like a stray dog. Kendra actually giggled, pulling out her phone and tapping the screen, probably texting her friends about the pathetic show happening in her dining room. They were all waiting for my reaction. They were waiting for my shoulders to shake. They were waiting for the tears to well up in my eyes. They wanted me to drop to my knees in my stained catering uniform and frantically peel those soaked $100 bills off the floor. They wanted the ultimate validation that their money made them superior beings, and that I was nothing more than the dirt beneath their expensive shoes. I looked down at the puddle of red wine and the ruined money. $300. Just minutes ago, $300 would have felt like a massive lifeline. It would have been enough to buy me a few more days to negotiate with my landlord. It would have been the difference between eating and starving. But as I stared at the floor, I felt the distinct rectangular shape of the Mega Millions ticket pressing against my palm through the fabric of my pocket. $42 million. The sheer absurdity of the contrast hit me like a physical wave. Jamal was sitting there puffing his chest out over $300, completely oblivious to the fact that I had more wealth sitting in my front pocket than his entire fraudulent real estate company would ever generate in his entire lifetime. I did not cry. The suffocating weight of my entire life, the crushing debt, the constant rejection, the unending feeling of being less than vanished in a single heartbeat. The power dynamic in the room instantly inverted, but I was the only one who knew it. I slowly lifted my head and looked Jamal directly in the eyes. I did not glare. I did not scowl. Instead, a genuine, relaxed smile spread across my face. It was not a forced smile. It was a cold, chilling smile of absolute victory. It was the smile of a woman who just realized she held the launch codes to destroy her enemy's entire existence. Jamal's arrogant smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. He was confused. This was not the script he had written in his head. I was supposed to be begging. I was supposed to be weeping on the floor. My complete lack of emotional distress unsettled him deeply. Kendra lowered her phone, her brow furrowing in confusion. Even my mother stopped chewing her prime rib, her eyes narrowing as she tried to understand why I was smiling at my own degradation. "Keep it." "Jamal?" I said, my voice soft and perfectly steady. "It looks like you are going to need every single penny very soon." I did not wait for his response. I did not look at my mother or my sister again. I turned around, stepped cleanly over the puddle of wine and the floating $100 bills and walked straight out of the formal dining room. The sound of my footsteps echoing down the marble hallway was the only sound left in the house. I did not walk toward the back door like Jamal had ordered. I walked straight through the main ballroom, cutting right through the crowd of wealthy party guests in my stained apron. People turned to stare at me, but I held my head high. Let them look, let them wonder. I reached the massive front double doors and pushed them open, stepping out into the cool night air. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, severing my connection to that house and that toxic family forever. I walked down the sweeping driveway past the line of imported luxury cars toward my rusted 15-year-old Honda parked by the service entrance. Every step I took felt lighter than the last. The chains of obligation of seeking my mother's impossible approval, of trying to keep the peace with a sister who actively hated me, were completely shattered. They had handed me the scissors to cut the cord, and they had done it with smiles on their faces. I unlocked my car door and slid into the driver's seat. I locked the doors behind me and pulled my cell phone out of my pocket. I slipped the protective case off and pulled out the lottery ticket. I turned on the overhead dome light and stared at the numbers one more time just to make sure I was not hallucinating from exhaustion. They were still there. They were absolutely perfect. I was no longer the broke, desperate sister begging for scraps from the family table. I was an undercover multimillionaire. And as I started the engine of my battered car and pulled out of the mansion driveway, I made a silent promise to myself. I was not just going to walk away from them. I was going to let them dig their own financial graves. And when the time was absolutely right, I was going to be the one holding the shovel. The sun came up on Monday morning, casting a harsh, pale light through the cheap plastic blinds of my apartment. It was the day before my scheduled eviction. For the past 5 years, waking up in this cramped space had filled me with a heavy knot of anxiety and dread. Today, however, the air felt entirely different. I made a pot of cheap coffee for the very last time. I opened my small closet and bypassed my stained catering uniforms. I pulled out my only professional outfit, which was a navy blue blazer I had found at a thrift store, and a pair of simple black slacks. I ironed them carefully, making sure I looked as presentable as possible. I left my apartment and drove my rusted Honda downtown toward the financial district. I bypassed the standard retail banks and pulled up to a towering glass skyscraper. The directory in the lobby listed Montgomery and Pierce on the top 3 floors. They were an elite wealth management and corporate law firm known for handling the estates of billionaires and untouchable tech moguls. Walking into their penthouse lobby felt like stepping onto another planet. The floors were imported white marble, and the air smelled of fresh espresso and expensive leather. The receptionist, an elegant woman in a tailored suit, looked at my scuffed sneakers and thrifted blazer with a polite but questioning gaze. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone completely professional but clearly skeptical. "I need an emergency consultation with a senior partner regarding a massive sudden influx of liquid assets," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "I have just come into possession of a winning Mega Millions lottery ticket. The jackpot is $42 million, and I need to claim it entirely anonymously." The receptionist's fingers froze over her keyboard. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second before her elite training kicked back in. "Please have a seat," she said softly. "I will get Mr. Montgomery immediately." 10 minutes later, I was sitting in a soundproof glass-walled conference room overlooking the entire city skyline. Richard Montgomery, the senior partner, walked in. He was a sharp, imposing man in his late 50s wearing a bespoke suit. He did not waste time with small talk. He sat across from me and asked to see the ticket. I pulled my phone from my pocket, slid off the protective case, and placed the small rectangular piece of cardboard on the polished mahogany table. Richard pulled a pair of reading glasses from his pocket and examined the numbers against the official lottery database pulled up on his tablet. After a long, tense minute, he looked up at me. He did not smile, but his eyes gleamed with intense professional respect. "Congratulations, Naomi," he said, sliding the ticket back to me. "You are about to be a very wealthy woman. My firm specializes in protecting high net worth individuals from exactly the kind of exposure you want to avoid. If you claim this publicly, your life as you know it will end. You will be hounded by distant relatives, scam artists, and the media. I do not care about the media, I told him, leaning forward. I care about my immediate family. I need a financial fortress. I want to build a blind trust. I want the money claimed under a corporate entity where my name is buried under so many legal layers that absolutely no one can connect it to me. To my family, I am currently a broke freelance event planner who is being evicted tomorrow. I need them to keep believing exactly that. Richard raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by my cold demeanor. Most lottery winners walk in here shaking and crying, he noted. You look like you are preparing for a corporate takeover. I am preparing to completely excise a cancer from my life, I replied flatly. But I need them to show their true colors first. For the next 4 hours, Richard and his team of specialized accountants drafted the paperwork. We created an ironclad legal entity. I named it the Phoenix Trust. The trust would legally claim the lottery ticket interface with the State Lottery Commission and pay all the required upfront taxes. The remaining funds, roughly $24 million after federal and state deductions, would be deposited into heavily encrypted accounts controlled exclusively by me through the trust. As far as the public record was concerned, the Phoenix Trust had won the lottery. Naomi did not exist on the paperwork. When I signed the final document handing the physical ticket over to Richard to be locked in their primary vault, a massive weight lifted off my chest. I was officially a multimillionaire. I could have walked out of that building, gone straight to a luxury car dealership, and bought a brand new Range Rover with a cashier's check. I could have booked a penthouse suite at a 5-star hotel and ordered room service for the next month. Instead, I drove my rusted Honda straight back to my tiny rundown apartment to prepare for my eviction. If I suddenly paid my landlord the back rent, my family would instantly know something had changed. Jamal had contacts all over the city's real estate market. If he found out I had suddenly come into thousands of dollars, the test would be ruined. My alibi had to be absolutely flawless. I needed to actually live the lie. On Tuesday morning, Mr. Henderson, my landlord, knocked heavily on my door. He held the official eviction paperwork in his hand, looking slightly apologetic. I am sorry, Naomi, he said, sighing as he handed me the clipboard. You are a quiet tenant, but the property management company makes the rules. You have until noon to get your things out before we change the locks. I understand, Mr. Henderson, I said, giving him a polite nod. I am packing my car right now. I spent the next 3 hours doing grueling physical labor. I packed my meager belongings into cheap cardboard boxes. I hauled them down 3 flights of stairs, sweating through my t-shirt. Every time my muscles ached, I reminded myself that this was the very last time I would ever have to struggle like this. I drove across town to the gritty industrial district and rented a 10 by 10 rusted chain-link storage unit. The facility smelled like old oil and damp concrete. I unloaded my boxes, stacking my entire past life into that dark metal cage. I kept only the absolute essentials. I packed a duffel bag with a few changes of clothes, my toothbrush, and a cheap sleeping bag. I tossed the duffel bag into the back seat of my Honda, making sure it was highly visible through the windows. I wanted my car to look exactly like the tragic home of a woman who had lost absolutely everything. That evening, I parked my car in the very back corner of a massive 24-hour grocery store parking lot. The neon lights buzzed loudly overhead, and the cold night air seeped through the thin windows of my old car. I reclined the driver's seat, pulled the cheap sleeping bag over my chest, and stared up at the stained fabric ceiling of the Honda. My back was aching. My stomach was rumbling because I had skipped dinner to make the scenario feel more authentic to my own mind. I pulled out my phone and opened the secure banking application Richard Montgomery had set up for me. I logged in using the encrypted credentials. The screen loaded, displaying the primary account balance for the Phoenix Trust. The numbers glowed brightly in the dark car, $24,312,000. I let out a soft, breathless laugh, locking the phone screen and plunging the car back into darkness. I was a multimillionaire sleeping in a grocery store parking lot by choice. The trap was perfectly set. The bait was in the water. My family thought they had successfully pushed me entirely off the edge of the cliff. They were going to sleep soundly tonight, believing they were superior, believing my failure was the ultimate proof of their success. I closed my eyes, getting as comfortable as I could in the cramped driver's seat. I knew exactly what was going to happen next. Kendra would not be able to resist gloating. She would wait a day or two to let the reality of my homelessness sink in, and then she would reach out, not to help me, but to leverage my desperation for her own gain. All I had to do was wait for my phone to ring. The morning sun glaring through the windshield woke me up. My neck was incredibly stiff, and the cold air had seeped deep into my bones during the night. I sat up in the driver's seat of my rusted Honda, rubbing my eyes and looking out at the sprawling grocery store parking lot. People were walking to their cars with hot coffee and fresh pastries, completely unaware of the woman sleeping in her vehicle just a few feet away. I grabbed a bottle of water from the passenger seat, took a long drink, and checked my phone. It was 8 in the morning. I knew my sister well enough to know she would not let me suffer in silence for too long. Kendra needed an audience for her superiority. She needed to know exactly how much pain I was in so she could feel better about her own hollow life. I did not have to wait long. At exactly 9:15, my phone vibrated against the center console. The caller ID flashed with Kendra's name. I took a deep breath. I needed to play this perfectly. I cleared my throat a few times, making sure my voice sounded properly raspy and exhausted. Then I answered the call. "Hello," I said, keeping my volume low and defeated. "Naomi? Oh my goodness, is that you?" Kendra asked. Her voice was dripping with fake sympathy, the kind of tone you use when speaking to a wounded animal that you are secretly disgusted by. "You sound absolutely terrible. Where are you right now?" "I am in the parking lot of a grocery store," I replied, letting out a carefully calculated sigh. "I got evicted yesterday, just like I said I would. I spent the night in my car." There was a brief pause on the line. I could almost hear the smug satisfaction radiating through the phone. She loved this. She loved knowing that the sister who refused to conform to their toxic standards had finally hit absolute rock bottom. "Wow, Naomi, that is just tragic," Kendra said, though she did not sound heartbroken at all. "Mom is completely stressed out about your situation. You know she hates knowing you are out there embarrassing the family like this. We were talking with Jamal last night, and we decided we simply cannot let you live on the street. It is a bad look for our brand." I gripped the steering wheel tight. Even in her fake charity, she could not help but make it about her image. "Thank you, Kendra," I whispered, forcing my voice to tremble slightly. "I really need a place to shower and sleep." "Well, Jamal is willing to be incredibly generous." Kendra continued, her voice picking up a brisk, businesslike cadence. "We have the home gym on the first floor. It has those rubber mats, so it is not exactly a mattress, but it is warm. You can use the half bathroom down the hall, but you cannot be in there between 6 and 8 in the morning because Jamal uses the Peloton, and you cannot let the cleaning staff see you because we do not want them gossiping." "Okay," I said meekly. "I understand. I will stay out of the way." "Great," Kendra chirped. "But there is just one tiny catch, Naomi. A small favor Jamal needs from you in exchange for opening his home to you." Here it was. The extortion. The real reason she had picked up the phone. I narrowed my eyes, staring at a stray shopping cart across the asphalt. "What kind of favor?" I asked. "It is about Grandma's house," Kendra said casually, as if she were talking about throwing away old clothes. "You know the little two-bedroom she left to both of us, the one sitting on that empty lot over in the East Ward." My heart went cold. When our grandmother passed away 5 years ago, she left her tiny dilapidated starter home to Kendra and me, splitting the deed 50-50. It was not a mansion. It was a crumbling brick house with a sagging roof and a weed-infested yard. But to me, it was the only place in the world where I had ever felt safe. Grandma was the only person in our family who did not care about money or status. She just loved me. I had refused to sell my half of the house out of pure sentimental value. But over the last 3 years, the East Ward had started gentrifying rapidly. Corporate developers were swarming the neighborhood, buying up old properties and bulldozing them to build luxury condos. Jamal had been salivating over Grandma's lot for months. It was a prime corner property. He needed to demolish the house to break ground on a massive multi-unit development, but he could not touch a single brick without my legal signature on the deed. Jamal has a major construction crew ready to go, Kendra explained, her tone dripping with impatience. But he cannot move forward because your name is still holding up the paperwork. It is basically a teardown anyway, Naomi. You cannot afford the property taxes, and you certainly cannot afford to fix it up. I stayed silent, letting her talk. So here is the deal, Kendra said, dropping the fake sympathy entirely. Jamal is willing to do you a massive favor. If you sign over your 50% of the deed to his development company today, he will let you sleep in the gym for a month. He will even give you $1,000 cash right now to help you get back on your feet. It is a win-win, Naomi. You get $1,000 and a warm place to sleep, and Jamal can finally start building. I sat in my car, absolutely stunned by the sheer predatory evil of her offer. $1,000. Grandma's lot was situated on a commercial corner in a booming district. Half of that property was easily worth $400,000 in the current market. They were not offering me a lifeline. They were using my manufactured homelessness to steal my only remaining asset for literal pennies. They were robbing me blind while pretending to be my saviors. Kendra, I said, forcing a desperate sob into my throat. That house is all we have left of Grandma. It is my only asset. You cannot ask me to just give it away for $1,000. Kendra let out a harsh, cruel laugh. An asset you cannot use, Naomi. She snapped, her true colors finally showing. You are sleeping in a Honda. You smell like stale sweat, and you have exactly $0 to your name. Beggars cannot be choosers. You do not get to hold on to sentimental garbage when you are practically begging on the street. You sign the paper today, or you can enjoy the winter freezing in your car. Your choice. She was so incredibly confident. She thought she had me completely backed into a corner with absolutely no way out. She thought I was a broken, desperate woman who would do anything just to survive the week. She had absolutely no idea that I was sitting on $24 million in liquid cash, and that her greedy, arrogant husband had just handed me the exact legal leverage I needed to destroy his entire company. I paused for a long 10 seconds, making her wait, making her think I was agonizing over the decision. Okay, I finally whispered, letting a single tear of fake defeat slip out. Okay, Kendra, I will sign the deed. I knew you would finally see reason. Kendra said, her voice instantly returning to that cheerful, arrogant tone. Jamal has a private notary he uses for all his real estate acquisitions. Meet us at the office on 4th Street at noon. Do not be late, Naomi. Jamal is a very busy man. She hung up the phone without another word. The line went dead. I lowered the phone from my ear. The pathetic, defeated expression vanished from my face entirely. I looked at the black screen of my phone, and a slow, dark smile spread across my lips. They thought they had just secured the final piece of their real estate puzzle. By forcing me to sign that deed, under what they assumed was extreme financial duress, Jamal was linking his shady development company directly to my name. He was stepping right into a massive legal bear trap. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, started the engine of my rusted car, and pulled out of the grocery store parking lot. It was time to go sign away my inheritance and set the absolute destruction of my family into motion. I parked my rusted Honda a block away from the address Kendra had texted me. 4th Street was a far cry from the towering glass skyscrapers and marble floors of my new wealth management firm. It was a strip of fading storefronts, pawn shops, and discount liquor stores. The notary office Jamal chose was sandwiched between a bail bondsman and a vacant lot. The neon sign in the window flickered, buzzing with a cheap electrical hum. It was exactly the kind of shady, off-the-books place a predatory real estate developer would use to quickly push through questionable paperwork. Before getting out of the car, I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked appropriately tragic. My thrift store blazer was deeply wrinkled from being slept in, and I had intentionally smudged a little bit of dark eyeshadow under my eyes to simulate dark circles from crying all night. I grabbed my worn-out purse and walked toward the office. When I pushed the heavy glass door open, the bell jingled loudly. The office smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap air freshener. Kendra and Jamal were already there, standing by a scuffed laminate counter. They looked entirely out of place in their designer clothes. Jamal was wearing a sharp charcoal suit, checking his heavy gold watch with obvious impatience. Kendra was holding a massive iced coffee, wearing oversized sunglasses inside the dim room, as if trying to shield herself from the poverty around her. "You are 5 minutes late, Naomi," Jamal snapped the moment he saw me. "Time is money. Let us get this over with." Kendra lowered her sunglasses, peering at me over the rim. She visibly recoiled. "Wow, you actually slept in your car," she said, her voice loud enough for the tired-looking notary behind the counter to hear. "You smell like an old basement. Let us hurry this up, Jamal, before the smell sticks to my clothes." I kept my head down, playing the role of the defeated sister. I walked up to the counter where a thick stack of legal documents was already waiting. The notary, a bald man with a stained tie, pushed a blue pen toward me without making eye contact. Jamal stepped up right next to me, invading my personal space. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a plain white envelope, tossing it onto the counter. It landed with a soft thud. "There is your $1,000, Jamal said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Cash, just like we agreed. Now sign the deed transfer and the property release forms." I stared at the paperwork. The bold print at the top read, "Full and final transfer of deed." For a brief second, a genuine wave of sadness washed over me. That tiny house had been my grandmother's pride and joy. It was where she taught me how to bake peach cobbler and where she told me stories about our ancestors. But I knew the house itself was just bricks and wood. The real legacy she left me was her strength, and I was about to use it. I picked up the pen, letting my hand tremble just a little bit. "Jamal." I started making my voice sound choked. "Please promise me you will do something nice with the lot. Grandma loved her garden." Jamal let out an exasperated sigh, rolling his eyes. "Do not start crying over dirt, Naomi," he barked. "I am tearing that garbage down on Monday and pouring a concrete foundation for a 40-unit luxury complex. Nobody cares about a garden. Just sign the paper." I nodded, wiping away a perfectly timed fake tear. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name. I flipped to the next page and signed again. I initialed every single line Jamal pointed to, completely surrendering my legal rights to the only piece of property I had ever owned. The second my pen lifted from the final signature, Jamal snatched the paperwork off the counter. He did not even wait for the notary to stamp it before he started inspecting my handwriting, making sure everything was legally binding. A massive, triumphant grin spread across his face. He looked at Kendra and nodded. They had won. They had finally taken everything from me. "Pleasure doing business with you, Naomi," Jamal said, slipping the documents into a sleek leather folder. "Take your envelope and get out of here." "Wait, what about the home gym?" I asked, clutching the white envelope to my chest. "You said I could stay there for a month." Kendra stepped forward, putting her hand on Jamal's arm. "Oh, right," she said, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "Listen, Naomi, Jamal and I talked about it on the way over here. We are hosting a big charity mixer at the house this weekend. We really cannot have you sneaking around the hallways looking like a homeless person. It would completely ruin our aesthetic." Jamal laughed, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "Yeah, your $1,000 should buy you a few nights at a cheap motel out by the highway. Use that time to fill out some fast food applications. Do not call us, we will call you." They were reneging on their promise immediately. They had used the promise of shelter as bait, and the second they got what they wanted, they kicked me right back out into the cold. It was so predictably ruthless that I almost broke character and laughed right in their faces. Instead, I let my shoulders slump. I gave them one last devastated look, turned around, and walked out of the office. I heard Kendra laugh behind me as the door swung shut. I walked down the cracked sidewalk, clutching the envelope of cash. As soon as I turned the corner and was out of their line of sight, my posture completely changed. My spine straightened. The sad, defeated expression melted off my face, replaced by a cold, hard determination. I reached my rusted Honda, got inside, and locked the doors. I tossed the envelope of cash onto the passenger seat without even looking at it. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed the direct line to Richard Montgomery. He answered on the second ring. "Naomi," he said, his deep voice cutting through the static. "Tell me you did not just give away a prime piece of real estate to a man who treats you like garbage." "I did exactly that, Richard," I said, staring straight ahead at the brick wall of the alleyway. "Jamal just took full legal ownership of the East Ward property. He is officially moving forward with his luxury condo development, which means his company is about to take on a massive amount of new debt to fund the construction." "I hear you," Richard said, his tone shifting from protective lawyer to corporate shark. "What is your play?" "I want a full microscopic financial audit of his entire development company," I ordered. "I want to know who holds the mortgage on his mansion. I want to know who financed Kendra's $90,000 Porsche. I want the names of every single private lender, bank, and investment firm he owes money to. Look for over-leveraged assets. Look for missed payments. Dig up every piece of dirty financial laundry that man is hiding." "Consider it done," Richard replied. "My team can have a preliminary dossier ready by tomorrow morning. What do you want us to do once we find the debt?" I leaned back in the driver's seat, a slow, dangerous smile forming on my face. "The Phoenix Trust has $24 million in liquid capital, Richard. When you find out who owns Jamal's debt, I want you to buy it. All of it. Pay a premium if you have to. I do not care what it costs. I want the Phoenix Trust to be the sole owner of every single dollar that man owes. I want to be his only creditor." There was a brief pause on the line. I could almost hear Richard smiling. "You are building a financial guillotine, Naomi," he said quietly. "Yes, I am," I replied. "And when the time is right, I am going to be the one who drops the blade. Call me when you have the files." I hung up the phone. The trap was officially set. Jamal and Kendra were currently celebrating their brilliant real estate steal, completely unaware that they had just handed me the exact coordinates to destroy their entire empire. I started the engine of my car and drove away from the sketchy notary office, leaving my old life completely behind. It was time to find the one person in my family who actually deserved to be saved. I drove my rusted car away from the downtown district and headed toward the quieter side of the city. I pulled into the parking lot of Centennial Park. I needed a moment to breathe, to let the adrenaline of the trap I had just set settle in my veins. I parked under the shade of a massive oak tree and walked over to a wooden bench facing the duck pond. The afternoon sun was warm, but I felt entirely cold inside. I had just officially declared war on my own mother and sister and signed away my only physical connection to my grandmother. 10 minutes later, a faded blue Buick pulled into the parking spot right next to my Honda. The engine sputtered loudly before dying out with a heavy metallic clank. The driver's side door creaked open and a woman stepped out. She was wearing a pale pink waitress uniform, a stained white apron, and sensible orthopedic shoes. It was my Aunt Denise. Aunt Denise was 62 years old, and my mother Brenda's older sister, but the two women could not have been more different. While my mother spent her days at exclusive country club luncheons, wearing designer silk and complaining about the service, Aunt Denise worked double shifts at a local diner just to keep her electricity turned on. She was a woman built by hard labor and genuine kindness. Denise walked over to the wooden bench, her knees visibly stiff and painful with every step she took. She sat down heavily next to me, letting out a long, exhausted sigh. She smelled of fried potatoes, strong black coffee, and cheap floral soap, a scent that always instantly reminded me of my childhood. "How did you know I was here?" I asked, keeping my voice quiet as I stared out at the water. Denise shook her head, pulling a pack of peppermint gum from her apron pocket. I called your landlord this morning to check on you. I knew you were struggling to make rent. He told me you had already packed your car and driven off. I figured you would come to this park. You always came to this exact spot when your mother was being cruel to you as a little girl. I looked down at my hands. I did not want to drag her into the toxic mess of our family dynamics. Denise looked at my wrinkled blazer, the dark smudges under my eyes, and the way I was holding myself together by a thread. Your mother called me last night, Denise said, her voice suddenly tight with deep protective anger. She was bragging, Naomi. She actually called me to brag. She told me you came to Kendra's anniversary party begging for rent money and that she turned you away. She said it was a necessary lesson in tough love. She said you needed to hit rock bottom to learn how to respect their success. Denise spat the words out like they were literal poison. Tough love, she scoffed, shaking her head in disgust. That woman would not know real love if it slapped her right in the face. She is so completely blinded by Kendra's fake jewelry and Jamal's flashy suits that she cannot even see her own flesh and blood suffering right in front of her. I stayed silent, letting her vent. It was incredibly validating to hear someone else acknowledge the absolute insanity of my family. Denise reached deep into the oversized front pocket of her pink diner apron. She pulled out a thick envelope wrapped heavily in layers of clear packing tape. The paper was crumpled and soft from being handled so many times over the years. She reached over, grabbed my hand, and slapped the heavy envelope firmly into my palm, closing my fingers tightly around it. What is this? I asked, looking down at the taped package. That is $2,500, Denise said, looking me dead in the eye with fierce intensity. It is entirely in cash. I went to the bank on my lunch break and emptied out my savings account. I stared at the envelope, feeling a massive, solid lump form in the back of my throat. My heart began to pound against my ribs. Aunt Denise, I know exactly what this money is for. I whispered, my voice breaking. This is your medical fund. You have been saving this up dollar by dollar for 3 years to pay for your knee replacement surgery. I cannot take this from you. You are in agonizing pain every single day at the diner. I tried to push the heavy envelope back into her hands, but she adamantly refused to take it. She pushed my hands back toward my chest, with a surprising amount of strength for a woman her age. You listen to me, Naomi Denise, said, her voice dropping to a fierce, protective whisper. Joints can wait, bones can ache. But I will be absolutely damned if I sit by and watch my niece sleep in the back seat of a frozen car while her mother drinks vintage wine in a rented mansion. Your grandmother would roll over in her grave if she saw how Brenda and Kendra were treating you right now. She reached up and cupped my cheek with her rough, calloused hand. You take this baby. You go rent a nice, clean apartment in a safe neighborhood. You buy yourself some hot food. And do not ever let them see you beg. Do you hear me? You are worth 10 of them. For the first time since Jamal shoved that catering invoice into my chest, for the first time since I realized I was facing eviction, and for the first time since I discovered I had won the $42 million, my carefully constructed emotional walls completely crumbled to the ground. Real hot tears spilled over my eyelashes and streamed down my cheeks. I leaned forward and wrapped my arms tightly around Aunt Denise, burying my face in her shoulder. I sobbed openly, shaking with the sheer, overwhelming weight of her gesture. She patted my back, humming a soft, gentle hymn, just like she used to do when I was a terrified little girl hiding from my mother's screaming matches. The contrast was absolutely staggering. My own mother, who lived in a massive house and wore $5,000 watches, had actively watched me drown and explicitly refused to throw me a life preserver. She had treated my pain as an embarrassing inconvenience. But Aunt Denise, who lived paycheck to paycheck and desperately needed major orthopedic surgery, had just handed me her entire life savings without a single second of hesitation. She had absolutely nothing, and yet she gave me everything she had. This was what true, unconditional love looked like. This was the family I had been searching for my entire life. I pulled back slowly, wiping my eyes with the wrinkled sleeve of my blazer. I looked down at the taped envelope resting in my lap. I knew I did not actually need the $2,500. I had $24 million sitting completely secure in a blind trust downtown. But if I refused the money now, it would deeply insult her pride, and it would raise far too many questions that I could not answer yet. So I carefully slipped the taped envelope into my worn-out purse. "Thank you, Aunt Denise," I whispered, my voice thick and heavy with raw emotion. "I promise you I will pay you back. Every single penny and then some." Denise smiled a warm, genuine smile that made the deep wrinkles around her eyes crease with kindness. "Do not you worry about paying me back right now," she said, standing up from the wooden bench and brushing the invisible dust off her pink apron. "You just focus on getting yourself back on your feet. I have to get back to the diner before the afternoon rush hits. You call me tonight and tell me you are somewhere safe and warm." I watched her walk back to her beat-up Buick. Her steps were agonizingly slow and rigid because of her failing knees. She climbed into the car, and the engine roared to life in a cloud of gray exhaust. As she drove away out of the park, I made a silent, ironclad vow to the universe. When the dust finally settled, and my revenge against Jamal and Kendra was completely finished, Aunt Denise would never have to work another day in her life. She would have the absolute best orthopedic surgeons in the entire country. She would live like royalty. She was the only true family member I had left, and she was the only one who was going to survive the absolute financial hurricane I was about to unleash. I sat alone on the park bench staring out at the calm water of the duck pond. Suddenly, my phone vibrated violently against my leg, shattering the quiet moment. I pulled it out of my pocket. It was a direct text message from Richard Montgomery, my lead wealth manager at the firm. The message was short, but it carried the weight of a loaded gun. "We found it, Naomi. We found Jamal's entire financial house of cards. You need to come to my office right now. The rot is much worse than we ever thought." I stood up from the park bench, a dangerous new energy surging through my veins. The emotional tears were entirely gone, replaced by a cold, ruthless focus. I had secured my only ally. Now it was time to go back downtown and officially begin the absolute destruction of the Golden Child. I drove straight from Centennial Park to the financial district. The afternoon traffic was thick, but my mind was moving at light speed. The tears I had shed for Aunt Denise were completely dry, replaced by a fierce, burning clarity. I pulled my rusted Honda into the underground parking garage of the Montgomery and Pierce building, parking directly between a silver Bentley and a sleek black Mercedes. I walked into the private elevator and pressed the button for the penthouse level. The thick mahogany doors slid open, and the elegant receptionist who had looked at me with skepticism just yesterday immediately stood up from her desk. She did not ask for my name. She simply nodded and guided me straight down the marble hallway to Richard's private office. Richard was standing by his floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the sprawling city skyline. A massive, thick binder sat dead center on his polished desk. It was easily 4 inches thick, packed tight with financial spreadsheets, bank statements, tax records, and property deeds. He turned around as I walked in. He did not smile. He looked exactly like a highly paid surgeon who was about to deliver a fatal diagnosis to a patient. "Have a seat," Naomi, Richard said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk. I sat down and crossed my legs, resting my hands in my lap. "Tell me everything," I said, my voice completely steady. Richard sat down and opened the heavy binder. "Naomi," he began, his tone deadly serious. "Your brother-in-law is not a real estate mogul. He is a financial illusionist, and he is currently standing on a trap door that is about to swing wide open. Everything he has built is completely fraudulent." I leaned forward, staring at the dense columns of numbers highlighted in bright yellow ink. "Show me," I demanded. Richard flipped to the first tab in the binder. "Let us start with their personal lifestyle. That $10,000 a night mansion they rented for the anniversary party where he humiliated you. He put that on a high-yield corporate credit card that is currently 90 days past due. The designer clothes, the diamond watches, the lavish dinners, it is all funded by revolving credit lines. Kendra is not a self-made millionaire. We audited her influencer lifestyle brand. She operates at a net loss of $40,000 a month. Jamal has been subsidizing her fake online life using funds illegally siphoned from his commercial business accounts. I stared at the paperwork, letting the sheer audacity of their lies sink in. What about the house, I asked? The massive mansion they live in? Kendra acts like it is a family estate that they own free and clear. Richard let out a dry, humorless laugh, tapping a manicured finger against a property deed. They do not own a single brick of that house, Naomi. It is leveraged to the absolute hilt. Jamal took out an adjustable rate mortgage 5 years ago. Since then, he has refinanced it 3 separate times, pulling the equity out to pay off other debts. The balloon payment on that mortgage is due in exactly 20 days. If he does not produce $1.2 million in cash, the bank will foreclose and change the locks immediately. And the new custom Porsche Kendra just ordered, I asked, keeping my face perfectly blank. Financed through a subprime auto lender at an extortionate 19% interest rate, Richard replied, flipping another page. They are bleeding cash from every conceivable pore. But the personal debt is just the tip of the iceberg. The real disaster is Jamal's commercial real estate development company. Richard pulled out a complex flowchart and slid it across the smooth mahogany desk. He explained exactly how Jamal's empire actually functioned. Jamal did not build anything of value. He bought distressed commercial properties using hard money loans from incredibly aggressive private lenders. He would promise them massive returns once the properties were developed. But he never actually finished the developments. Whenever a loan came due, he would simply borrow more money from a new lender at a higher interest rate to pay off the first one. It was a classic shell game, a real estate Ponzi scheme. He is shifting debt from one sinking ship to another, Richard explained, tracing the lines on the flowchart with his pen. He is also cross-collateralizing his loans, which borders on wire fraud. He is using the exact same properties to guarantee multiple loans from different banks. But the music has finally stopped. The commercial real estate market cooled down this quarter, and his private lenders are getting incredibly nervous. 3 of his biggest financial backers have officially called in their loans. They are demanding immediate repayment in full. He owes them a combined total of $7.5 million. The pieces of the puzzle instantly snapped together in my mind. The sudden desperation, the fake sympathy on the phone, the $1,000 bribe at the sketchy notary office. That is why he needed my grandmother's house so badly, I said, staring at the deed transfer document Richard had pulled from public records. He was completely out of collateral. He needed a fresh asset. Exactly, Richard confirmed, leaning back in his chair. That corner lot in the East Ward was his last desperate play. He planned to use the clear deed of your grandmother's house to secure a high-interest bridge loan just to keep his primary creditors at bay for 1 more month. He was willing to steal your only asset and leave you homeless just to buy himself a few more weeks of breathing room. He threw you completely under the bus to save his own sinking ship. But it is not going to be enough, is it? I asked. Richard shook his head slowly. Not even close. The East Ward property might secure him a $500,000 loan if he finds a desperate lender. It is a drop in the ocean compared to the $7.5 million he owes by the end of the month. He is facing complete and total financial annihilation. When these private lenders realize he cannot pay, they will seize absolutely everything. The commercial properties, the mansion, the cars, the jewelry. They will strip him down to the studs and leave him with nothing. I sat back in the leather chair, letting the absolute magnitude of his fraud wash over me. For years, Kendra and Jamal had tormented me. They had mocked my rusted car, my tiny apartment, my thrift store clothes. My mother Brenda had praised Jamal's business acumen at every single family gathering and constantly compared my honest hard work to his flashy success. She had told me I was a failure because I did not generate wealth the way Jamal did. She had told me I was an embarrassment to the family name. But it was all a complete lie. Every single insult, every condescending remark, every time they made me feel small, it was all built on a mountain of predatory debt and financial fraud. They were not better than me. They were just significantly better at lying. They were absolute parasites pretending to be royalty. Naomi Richards said softly, breaking the heavy silence in the room, "You have the power to do whatever you want right now. The Phoenix Trust is fully funded and operational. We can sit back, do absolutely nothing, and watch his creditors tear him apart. It will happen entirely on its own within the next month. You will get to watch the golden child fall from grace from a safe distance." I looked at the thick binder of Jamal's debts. I thought about the way Jamal had dropped those crisp $100 bills into the puddle of spilled wine, telling me to scrub the floor for his spare change. I thought about Kendra laughing in the notary office, telling me to sleep at a cheap highway motel after stealing my inheritance. I thought about my mother telling me that giving me a $2,000 loan to save me from the streets was a dead investment. "I do not want to just watch it happen, Richard," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, ruthless whisper. "I want to be the one holding the leash." Richard leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. A sharp, predatory gleam appeared in his eyes. "Tell me what you want to do." "I want the Phoenix Trust to buy his debt," I commanded. "I want you to contact every single one of those private lenders who are currently calling in his loans. Offer to buy Jamal's debt portfolios from them at a premium. Give them 10 cents over the dollar if you have to. I do not care what it costs. Just make sure they sign the notes over to the trust. I want to buy the mortgage on his mansion. I want to buy the note on Kendra's custom Porsche. I want to legally own every single dollar that man owes to the world." Richard typed rapidly on his sleek tablet, his eyes scanning the numbers. "It will cost roughly $8.2 million to secure the primary commercial notes and the residential mortgage," he calculated, looking up at me. "Are you absolutely certain you want to commit that much of your liquid capital to this move? You will be taking on all the risk if he defaults." "It is not a risk if I am the one pulling the trigger," I replied smoothly. "Buy it all, Richard. And once the ink is dry, I want you to immediately initiate foreclosure proceedings on his primary residence. I want his business accounts frozen. Do not give him an extension. Do not negotiate. I want you to accelerate the debt and demand payment in full immediately." Richard looked at me, a slow, admiring smile spreading across his face. "You are going to be his sole creditor. When he looks up at the sky, praying for a miracle to save his fake empire, it will be you holding the lightning bolt." I stood up from the leather chair and straightened my thrift store blazer. "Jamal spent years building a kingdom out of sand and arrogance," I said, turning toward the heavy mahogany door. "It is time to let the tide roll in. Make the calls, Richard. I want to own my brother-in-law by the end of the week." 3 weeks passed since I sat in Richard Montgomery's office and ordered the absolute financial destruction of my brother-in-law. During those 21 days, I lived a bizarre double life. By day, I met with my wealth management team in their glass penthouse, signing off on massive wire transfers and legally acquiring every single piece of debt Jamal owed. By night, I slept in my rusted Honda in the grocery store parking lot, maintaining the perfect illusion of a broken homeless woman. Thanksgiving Day arrived with a bitter, freezing wind. My mother, Brenda, always hosted an extravagant holiday dinner at her sprawling suburban colonial home. It was less about family and much more about displaying her perceived wealth to the extended relatives who traveled into town. I pulled my faded car into her neighborhood, but I intentionally parked 3 blocks away. I knew if I parked my rusting vehicle in her pristine driveway, she would demand I move it, so I did not ruin the aesthetic for the neighbors. I walked the remaining distance, bracing myself against the cold. I was wearing my oldest, most faded clothes: a stretched-out gray wool sweater, a pair of jeans with frayed hems, and scuffed brown boots. I had skipped washing my hair for 2 days, making sure I looked exactly like a woman who was living out of a duffel bag. When I rang the doorbell, my mother answered. She was wearing a custom-tailored emerald green dress, her hair professionally blown out. She took one look at my wrinkled sweater, and her smile instantly vanished. She did not offer me a hug. She did not ask if I was cold. She simply stepped aside and let out a long, exasperated sigh. You actually came, she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper so the guests inside would not hear. I honestly thought you would have the decency to stay away, Naomi. You look absolutely dreadful. Please tell me you are not going to ask anyone for money today. I am just here for dinner, Mom, I replied, keeping my eyes cast downward, playing the role of the defeated scapegoat perfectly. I will not cause any trouble. I walked past her into the grand foyer. The house smelled of expensive roasted turkey cinnamon apples and pure arrogance. The extended family was gathered in the main living room, holding crystal wine glasses and laughing loudly. I noticed immediately that Aunt Denise was not there. She had texted me earlier that morning, apologizing that she had to work a double shift at the diner to cover the holiday rush. I was secretly incredibly relieved. I did not want her witnessing the toxic performance I was about to endure. I quietly made my way to the formal dining room and took a seat at the very far end of the massive table. For the next hour, I sat in near silence as the rest of the family filed in and took their places. Kendra and Jamal arrived fashionably late, making a grand entrance. Kendra was draped in a designer cashmere wrap, her wrists sparkling with a new diamond tennis bracelet. Jamal wore a tailored cashmere turtleneck, looking every bit the arrogant real estate mogul he pretended to be. When Kendra saw me sitting at the end of the table, she let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "Wow, Naomi," she said loud enough for the entire room to hear. "You really are committing to this whole street urchin aesthetic. Did you walk here, or did your garbage can on wheels finally break down completely?" A few of the distant cousins chuckled awkwardly, looking down at their plates. Jamal smirked, pulling out a chair for Kendra. "I hope that $1,000 I gave you at the notary office did not burn a hole in your pocket, Naomi," Jamal added smoothly. "You should really use it to buy a winter coat instead of whatever rags you are currently wearing." I simply nodded, staring at my empty porcelain plate. "Thank you, Jamal," I whispered. "I am being very careful with the money." My mother took her place at the head of the table, clapping her hands to demand everyone's attention. A team of hired servers began bringing out massive silver platters of food. "Before we eat," Brenda announced, raising her crystal glass of vintage champagne, "I want to make a very special toast." The room fell completely silent. I watched my mother look at Kendra and Jamal with an expression of absolute adoration. It was the exact look of maternal pride I had spent my entire childhood desperately trying to earn. This year, our family has been blessed with incredible success. Brenda began, her voice swelling with emotion. "As many of you know, Jamal has officially secured the prime corner lot in the East Ward. He is breaking ground on a massive luxury condominium project next month. His vision and his dedication are a true inspiration to all of us." Jamal leaned back in his chair, taking a slow sip of his wine, looking incredibly smug. He actually believed he was untouchable. He believed that forcing me to sign away my grandmother's deed had saved his sinking company. He had absolutely no idea that the bridge loan he applied for using that deed had been secretly purchased by the Phoenix Trust 3 days ago. And because of his remarkable business acumen, Brenda continued, her voice rising with excitement. "I am incredibly proud to announce that Jamal and Kendra are going to be featured on the cover of City Enterprise magazine next month. The article is all about young generational wealth and building a luxury empire." A chorus of gasps and applause erupted around the table. The relatives raised their glasses, cheering for the golden couple. Kendra beamed, waving her diamond-draped wrist in the air. To Jamal and Kendra, Brenda said, looking directly at them, "Thank you for elevating our family name. You are the absolute perfect example of what happens when you work hard and refuse to settle for mediocrity." Brenda slowly turned her head and locked eyes with me at the far end of the table. Her expression hardened into a mask of pure, cold judgment. She did not say my name, but the pointed silence was deafening. The message was incredibly clear to everyone in the room. Kendra was the absolute pinnacle of success, and I was the humiliating failure sitting in their shadows. "Cheers," the family echoed, clinking their glasses together. I picked up my water goblet and took a slow, quiet sip. I did not feel humiliated. I did not feel a single ounce of pain. As I sat there in my faded sweater, listening to them applaud a man who was mathematically bankrupt, I felt an overwhelming sense of absolute power. My inner monologue was running at a completely different frequency than the rest of the room. While they were passing the roasted turkey and the garlic mashed potatoes, I was mentally reviewing the legal documents Richard Montgomery had finalized yesterday afternoon. The Phoenix Trust was now the sole legal owner of Jamal's primary commercial debt portfolio. We owned the $7.5 million he owed to his private lenders. We owned the massive balloon mortgage on the $10,000 a night mansion he was currently renting. We even owned the high-interest auto loan on Kendra's brand-new custom Porsche. I looked at Jamal's expensive cashmere sweater and smiled internally. I owned the shirt on his back. I owned the chair he was sitting in. I owned the very foundation of his entire fake reality. The financial guillotine was not just positioned over his neck. The blade was already dropping. Throughout the dinner, Kendra made sure to throw constant microaggressions in my direction. When the gravy boat reached my end of the table, she leaned forward. "Make sure you get enough calories today," Naomi Kendra teased maliciously. "You know they do not serve portions this big at the downtown soup kitchens." I calmly poured the gravy over my mashed potatoes. "Thank you, Kendra," I replied smoothly. "I appreciate your concern for my diet." Jamal laughed, chewing his food loudly. "Honestly, Naomi," he said, pointing his silver fork at me, "I still cannot believe you just gave up your half of that East Ward property so easily. I mean, I practically stole it from you. But hey, business is business, right? The strong survive and the weak get eaten." He was practically begging me to react. He wanted me to scream. He wanted me to cry and ruin the Thanksgiving dinner so he could prove to everyone that I was unstable. "You are absolutely right, Jamal," I said, looking him dead in the eyes. "The strong survive, and business is business." Something in my completely flat, emotionless tone made Jamal's smile falter for a fraction of a second. He narrowed his eyes at me suddenly, unsure of why I was not breaking down under his relentless cruelty. But his towering arrogance quickly swallowed his brief moment of doubt. He went right back to bragging about his fake commercial developments to his captive audience. As the dinner wound down, my mother tapped her glass again. "Before we serve the pumpkin pie, let us go around the table and say one thing we are truly thankful for," she instructed. When it was Kendra's turn, she ran her hand over her diamond bracelet. "I am thankful for my incredible husband, who provides such a flawless, beautiful life for me," she purred. When it was Jamal's turn, he puffed his chest out. "I am thankful for my expanding real estate empire and the brilliant financial moves I made this year," he declared. The circle finally reached me at the end of the table. Every single eye turned to stare at me, waiting to hear what the homeless failure could possibly be grateful for. I placed my napkin on the table and sat up perfectly straight. "I am thankful for the absolute truth," I said, my voice ringing clearly in the quiet room. "Because the truth always comes to the surface eventually. And I am incredibly thankful for the roof over my head, wherever that may be tomorrow." A few relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My mother rolled her eyes, dismissing my words entirely. "Let us just serve the pie," she ordered sharply, eager to change the subject away from my depressing existence. I ate my dessert in silence, savoring the sweet taste of the cinnamon and nutmeg. They thought this was their ultimate victory lap. They thought they had successfully crushed me into the dirt. But they were completely unaware that the heavy machinery of the legal system was already in motion. The massive foreclosure notices and the commercial default warrants had already been printed at the law firm. They were currently sitting inside certified mail envelopes waiting to be dispatched. As soon as the holiday weekend was over, Jamal's entire world was going to explode into a million unfixable pieces. I finished my pie, stood up from the table, and quietly slipped out the front door without saying goodbye. I walked back to my rusted car in the freezing wind, feeling warmer than I had in my entire life. The first 2 weeks of December passed in absolute silence. I continued my daily routine of meeting with Richard Montgomery at his penthouse office and sleeping in my rusted Honda at night. The winter chill was biting, but the knowledge of what was coming kept me entirely warm. I had instructed Richard to wait until the second Tuesday of the month to execute the final phase of our plan. The timing was incredibly intentional. It was right in the middle of the holiday season when Kendra and Jamal were scheduled to host multiple high-profile charity dinners and attend exclusive winter galas. I wanted their financial collapse to happen when the spotlight on them was the absolute brightest. On that Tuesday morning, I was sitting in a cracked vinyl booth at the diner where Aunt Denise worked. I had ordered a black coffee and a plate of scrambled eggs. Denise was busy wiping down the counter across the room, so I was sitting alone. At exactly 10:15, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a message in the family group chat. The chat was usually a silent space only active when my mother Brenda wanted to post a picture of a new luxury purchase, or when Kendra wanted to brag about her influencer statistics. The first message was from Kendra. It was a simple text. Jamal, call me right now. My black card just declined at the boutique. The terminal said the account is frozen. I took a slow sip of my hot coffee watching the screen. A minute later, another text popped up from Kendra. Jamal, answer your phone. I am standing at the register and they are looking at me like I am a criminal. I just tried the platinum card and it declined too. What is going on? I smiled, resting my phone against the sugar dispenser so I could watch the chaos unfold, hands-free. Richard had struck the first match. By freezing their personal revolving credit lines, he was instantly cutting off Kendra's life support. Her entire identity was tied to her ability to swipe those cards without a second thought. 5 minutes later, my mother Brenda chimed into the group chat. Kendra, sweetheart, do not panic. It is probably just a fraud alert. You know how the banks get around the holidays when you are making large purchases. Jamal will call the bank manager and have it sorted out in 5 minutes. But Jamal did not sort it out in 5 minutes. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The silence in the group chat was heavy and pregnant with building panic. Finally, at 10:45, a voice note from Kendra dropped into the chat. I tapped the play button, holding the phone close to my ear. Kendra's voice was completely unrecognizable. The arrogant, polished tone she always used was entirely gone, replaced by a high-pitched, breathless panic. She was hyperventilating. Mom, she gasped, her voice shaking violently. Mom, it is not a fraud alert. I just drove to Jamal's office. There are corporate lawyers in the lobby. The bank literally froze every single one of our joint accounts, checking savings, business, everything. Jamal is locked in his office screaming at his legal team. They are telling him his commercial lenders just called in all of his loans at the exact same time. They want $7.5 million by Friday. Mom, what is happening? We do not have $7 million in cash. I listened to her voice note 3 times, letting the sheer terror in her voice wash over me. It was music to my ears. For years, she had told me I was a pathetic loser for struggling to pay rent. Now she was staring down the barrel of a $7 million deficit, and she was absolutely crumbling under the pressure. The group chat exploded. My mother started sending rapid-fire text messages. Jamal, what is she talking about? Call your investors. Call the country club board. You have lines of credit. Fix this right now. Kendra is having a panic attack. Jamal finally responded. His text was disjointed and filled with typos, proving that his usual arrogant composure was completely shattered. I cannot fix it, Brenda. This is a coordinated hostile takeover. I just got off the phone with my primary lenders. They do not own my debt anymore. Every single one of my commercial loans was bought out yesterday by a private corporate entity. The new owner invoked the acceleration clauses. The debt is due immediately. My mother replied instantly. Who bought it? Just call them and negotiate an extension. Offer them a higher interest rate. You are a brilliant negotiator, Jamal. Do what you do best. A few minutes later, Jamal sent a long voice note. I clicked play. In the background, I could hear papers being thrown and chairs scraping against the floor. He sounded like a cornered animal. I cannot negotiate with them, Brenda, he yelled, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. The company is called the Phoenix Trust. They are a ghost. My lawyers cannot even find out who the primary shareholder is. They operate entirely behind a wall of elite wealth managers downtown. I just tried to call their lead attorney to beg for a 30-day extension, and he literally laughed and hung up on me. They refuse to negotiate. They refuse to restructure. They want the cash by Friday, or they are seizing all the commercial properties. Another voice note immediately followed this one from Kendra. She was openly sobbing now. The sound of her crying the golden child who had mocked my impending homelessness just weeks ago echoed in my ear. "Mom, it gets worse," she wailed. "The trust did not just buy the commercial debt, they bought the mortgage on our house. The bank sold our mortgage. The trust is demanding the $1.2 million balloon payment today. If we do not pay it, they are initiating emergency foreclosure. They are going to take the house, Mom. They are going to take my car. Everything is leveraged. We have absolutely nothing." The absolute silence that followed in the group chat was the most satisfying silence I had ever experienced in my entire life. My mother, the woman who had praised Jamal's fake wealth and told me my life was a dead investment, had absolutely nothing left to say. There was no advice she could give. There was no country club connection she could call to fix a completely legal, ironclad corporate margin call. Her golden son-in-law was being mathematically annihilated in real time. I looked up from my phone as Aunt Denise walked over to my booth, holding a fresh pot of coffee. She poured a steaming refill into my mug, giving me a warm maternal smile. "Everything okay, baby?" she asked, noticing me staring intently at my screen. "Everything is absolutely perfect, Aunt Denise," I said, picking up my mug and taking a long, satisfying sip. "I am just catching up on some family news." I looked back down at the screen. Jamal was sending frantic messages demanding to know if anyone had a contact at a major hedge fund who could bail him out. He was grasping at thin air. He had spent his entire career stepping on the backs of hardworking people, stealing properties and leveraging fake assets. He thought he was the smartest predator in the ocean. He never once considered that there might be a silent, unseen leviathan swimming right beneath him, just waiting for the perfect moment to snap its jaws shut. I placed my phone face down on the diner table. I did not reply to the group chat. I did not offer fake sympathy or ask what was wrong. I remained completely silent, letting them drown in their own manufactured panic. The Phoenix Trust was a merciless machine, and I was the one holding the remote control. Friday was exactly 3 days away. I knew exactly what they were going to do next. When arrogant people realize they cannot bully or negotiate their way out of a problem, they turn to the people they perceive as weaker than them to absorb the impact. They were going to start looking for a scapegoat to bleed dry. And since they believed I had already given them my only asset, they would turn their desperate sights on the only other person in the family who had a kind heart. They were going to go after Aunt Denise. I finished my eggs and left a $20 tip on the table. I walked out of the diner and got back into my rusted Honda. The financial guillotine had dropped. Now it was time to watch them scramble as the blade rushed toward their necks. I stayed at the diner for another hour after the family group chat went completely silent. I ordered a second cup of coffee and watched the lunch rush begin to pick up. The diner was filling quickly with construction workers and office clerks trying to escape the bitter December cold. I watched Aunt Denise move gracefully between the crowded tables, carrying heavy trays of hot food. I could see the subtle wince in her face every time she put weight on her bad knee. Suddenly, the heavy glass front doors of the diner swung violently open, hitting the wall with a loud bang. The bell above the door jingled frantically. I looked up from my coffee mug and saw my mother Brenda and my sister Kendra marching inside. I almost did not recognize them. For the first time in my entire life, Kendra was not wearing custom-tailored designer clothes or flawless makeup. She was wearing a baggy gray hooded sweatshirt and black sweatpants. Her hair was pulled into a messy knotted bun, and her face was blotchy and swollen from intense crying. My mother looked equally destroyed, wearing an oversized winter coat and dark sunglasses indoors, attempting to hide her panicked expression. They looked completely unhinged. They marched right past the hostess stand, ignoring the line of waiting customers. They scanned the busy restaurant, but they did not notice me sitting quietly in the shadowed corner booth in the back. Their eyes were entirely locked onto Aunt Denise, who was standing behind the main counter, wiping down the pie display case. Kendra ran right up to the counter, reaching across the laminate surface and grabbing Aunt Denise's arm. "Denise, you have to help us," Kendra pleaded, her voice cracking loudly enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Jamal is going to lose absolutely everything. The bank is foreclosing on our house tomorrow morning. We need cash right now, or we are going to be living on the street." Aunt Denise dropped her cleaning rag and stared at Kendra in complete shock. She looked around at the customers who had stopped eating to watch the commotion. "Kendra, what on earth are you doing here?" Denise asked, keeping her voice low and stern. "Keep your voice down. I am in the middle of a shift." My mother pushed her way forward, taking off her sunglasses to reveal her red, tear-streaked eyes. "Denise, please," Brenda begged, abandoning every single ounce of her usual country club pride. "Jamal's lenders completely pulled out. We need $150,000 by tomorrow morning to stop the emergency foreclosure on the mansion and buy him enough time to liquidate his commercial assets. You own your house free and clear, Denise. You have to go to the bank right now and take out a second mortgage. You can give the cash to Jamal. He will pay you back with interest, I swear it." I sat completely frozen in my booth, listening to the sheer audacity of their request. They were actually asking a 62-year-old waitress with failing joints to risk the only roof over her head to bail out a fraudulent millionaire. They wanted Denise to leverage her tiny working-class home to save a $10,000 a night mansion. It was the most despicable, predatory thing I had ever witnessed my family do. Aunt Denise pulled her arm away from Kendra, stepping back from the counter. Her expression hardened into a mask of pure disbelief and deep anger. "Are you completely out of your mind, Brenda?" Denise asked, her voice thick with righteous indignation. "I make $14 an hour pouring coffee. That little house is the only thing standing between me and absolute poverty. I am not taking out a mortgage so your arrogant husband can keep his luxury mansion, Kendra. I do not have that kind of money, and even if I did, I would never give it to a man who treats people like garbage." Kendra let out a loud, hysterical sob, stomping her foot on the checkered linoleum floor like a spoiled toddler throwing a tantrum. "You are lying," she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "You just do not want to help us. You are just jealous because Jamal is successful, and you have been working in this greasy diner your entire life. We are your family, Denise. You are supposed to sacrifice everything for family. Denise, you cannot turn your back on your own niece," Brenda hissed, leaning aggressively across the counter. "Do you want Kendra to be homeless? Do you want her sleeping in the freezing cold in the back seat of a car?" The absolute hypocrisy of her words almost made me laugh out loud. Just 3 weeks ago, my mother had actively encouraged me to sleep in my rusted car. She had called my manufactured homelessness a necessary lesson in tough love. She had told me I was a dead investment. Now that it was Kendra facing the cold reality of the streets, it was suddenly a massive tragedy that required the entire family to sacrifice everything they owned. Aunt Denise shook her head, pointing a stern finger at my mother. "I am not losing my house for your mistakes," Brenda Denise said firmly. "You need to leave my diner right now before I call my manager to have you escorted out." Kendra spun around, throwing her hands in the air in a fit of sheer, blind panic. She felt the walls completely closing in around her. As she turned, her red, swollen eyes scanned the back of the restaurant and locked directly onto me. She froze for a second, staring at my faded thrift store blazer and my half-empty coffee mug. I did not look away. I stared right back at her, keeping my face completely blank. All the fear and panic inside Kendra instantly morphed into vicious, blinding rage. She desperately needed a punching bag. She needed someone to blame for the complete collapse of her perfect fake world. She stomped across the diner floor, marching straight up to my corner booth. "What are you looking at?" Naomi Kendra shrieked, pointing a shaking manicured finger directly at my face. "Are you enjoying this? Are you sitting there laughing at me because my entire life is falling apart?" I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked up at her, taking in her ruined makeup and her panicked, heavy breathing. I am just drinking my coffee, Kendra, I said smoothly, my calm demeanor only fueling her absolute rage. If you were not such a useless leech, Naomi, you could actually help our family right now. Kendra screamed, her voice echoing off the diner walls. If you had gone to a real college and gotten a real corporate job instead of being a pathetic broke loser, you would have a savings account. You could write us a check and save my house. You could save Jamal's company. But no, you are just a massive drain on everyone around you. You cannot even afford your own rent. So now I am going to lose everything because my older sister is completely useless. My mother walked up behind Kendra, glaring down at me with absolute open disgust. Kendra is right, Naomi. Brenda spat, her voice dripping with venom. Look at you, sitting in a cheap diner doing absolutely nothing while your sister's entire life is on the line. You have always been completely selfish. You took our money and our resources for years, and now when we actually need someone to step up and save this family, you have absolutely nothing to offer. You are a complete waste of space. They were projecting every single ounce of their own massive failure directly onto me. They wanted me to feel guilty for not being able to save them from their own staggering greed. They wanted me to absorb their pain and their humiliation so they could feel lighter. I sat there letting their toxic words wash right over me. I felt the solid rectangular outline of my cell phone in my front pocket. I knew that with one single phone call to Richard Montgomery, I could stop the foreclosure. I could wire $150,000 to Jamal's accounts in less than 10 minutes and save their mansion. I could pay off the $7 million commercial debt and save his entire fake empire. I had the power of an absolute god in this exact situation. But I looked at my sister, who was demanding that our elderly aunt risk her only home. I looked at my mother, who was calling me a waste of space while begging for charity. They had not learned a single thing. They were still the exact same cruel, arrogant predators they had always been. They did not deserve a single ounce of mercy. I slowly picked up my coffee mug and took a long, calm sip. I looked Kendra directly in her tear-filled eyes. It sounds like you have a really big problem, Kendra, I said, my voice ice-cold and completely steady. But it is not my problem. You should probably go start packing your bags. I hear the foreclosure agents arrive very early in the morning. I slid out of the cracked vinyl booth and stood up to my full height. I did not raise my hands or make any sudden aggressive movements. I simply walked over and placed my body squarely between my sister and Aunt Denise, forming an impenetrable physical barrier. The entire diner had gone completely silent. The clinking of silverware and the low hum of conversation had entirely stopped. Every single patron and staff member was watching us. Get out of my way, Naomi, Kendra hissed, her face contorted with ugly desperation. You have absolutely no right to interfere in family business. Denise has the equity. She has to give it to us. I am the only thing standing between you and the police right now, Kendra, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet room. You are not asking for family help. You are trying to extort a working-class woman because your fraudulent husband ran out of people to scam. My mother marched forward, grabbing my arm with her manicured hand. Her grip was surprisingly tight, her acrylic nails digging into my thrift store sweater. How dare you speak to your sister that way? Brenda spat, her eyes wide with frantic rage. Jamal is a brilliant businessman who hit a temporary cash flow problem. We are trying to save their home. You are going to stand down and let Denise do the right thing. I looked down at my mother's hand gripping my arm. I did not pull away. I simply stared at her fingers until she felt the absolute freezing coldness of my gaze and slowly let go, taking a half step back. You do not get to come in here and bully the only decent person in our bloodline, I said, my voice dangerously low and completely unwavering. Aunt Denise is off limits. You will not call her. You will not visit her. You will never ask her for a single penny ever again. If I ever hear that you harassed her at her job or showed up at her house, I will personally hire a lawyer to file a restraining order against both of you. You are permanently banned from her life." Kendra let out a raw, guttural scream of absolute frustration. "You cannot do that!" she shrieked, her voice cracking wildly. "We are going to lose the mansion, Naomi. Do you not understand English? The bank is demanding $150,000 in immediate arrears by Friday morning, or they are throwing our belongings onto the lawn. Jamal is going to be ruined. My brand is going to be ruined. I am going to have absolutely nothing." I looked at her tear-stained face, taking in the absolute terror in her eyes. For her entire life, Kendra had equated her human worth with her bank account and her designer labels. The thought of being poor terrified her more than death itself. She wanted me to feel sorry for her. She wanted me to break down and apologize for not being able to magically fix her massive financial disaster. I felt no pity. I felt absolutely nothing but a profound sense of justice. "It sounds like you have a lot of packing to do before Friday morning," I said, maintaining direct eye contact. "I suggest you start with the designer handbags. They usually fetch a decent price at the pawn shops downtown." Kendra gasped, clutching her chest as if I had physically stabbed her. My mother looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You are dead to me." Naomi, Brenda whispered, her voice shaking with rage. "You are entirely dead to this family. If we lose everything, I will make sure everyone knows it was because you refused to help us." I gave my mother a small, polite nod. "I have been dead to you for 35 years, Mom," I replied smoothly. "Now you just finally have the courage to say it out loud. Get out of the diner before I call the cops." My mother grabbed Kendra's arm. They turned around and stormed out of the restaurant, pushing the heavy glass doors open and disappearing into the cold December afternoon. The bell above the door jingled softly in their wake. Slowly, the diner patrons went back to their meals, a low murmur of gossip sweeping through the room. I turned around to face Aunt Denise. She was leaning against the back counter, holding her hand over her heart. She looked incredibly pale and deeply shaken by the viciousness of the ambush. "Naomi, how on earth did you know they were facing foreclosure?" Denise asked, her voice trembling slightly. "They have been bragging about their wealth all year. How did it all collapse so fast?" I reached out and gently squeezed her hand. I gave her a warm, reassuring smile, completely different from the cold mask I had just worn for my mother and sister. "The truth always catches up to people, Aunt Denise," I said softly. "Do not worry about them anymore. They are never going to bother you again, I promise you that." The next 48 hours moved exactly according to my design. I did not sleep in my rusted Honda anymore. I moved into a luxury suite at a 5-star hotel downtown, paying for it using a secure corporate card linked to the Phoenix Trust. I spent Thursday afternoon in Richard Montgomery's penthouse office, reviewing the final foreclosure execution documents. Every legal deadline had passed. Jamal had failed to produce the $1.50 million. His commercial creditors had officially stripped him of his business assets. His shell company was completely bankrupt. Friday morning arrived with a bitter, freezing wind. The sky was overcast, casting a harsh gray light over the sprawling, affluent suburbs. I was not physically present on the manicured lawn of Jamal's $10,000 a night mansion, but Richard had hired a private security contractor to monitor the eviction process and stream the audio and video directly to an encrypted tablet in our office. I sat in a plush leather chair sipping hot espresso, watching the absolute destruction of Jamal's fake empire unfold in high-definition real time. At exactly 8 in the morning, 3 black SUVs pulled into the massive circular driveway of the estate. 6 private foreclosure agents wearing cheap off-the-rack suits stepped out carrying heavy clipboards and thick stacks of legal documents. They were accompanied by 2 uniformed county sheriff deputies to ensure the peace was kept during the physical lockout. The front doors of the mansion swung open. Jamal marched out onto the porch, his face flushed bright red with screaming rage. He was holding his cell phone in one hand and frantically waving his other arm at the agents. He was wearing silk pajamas, having clearly been woken up by the sound of the heavy vehicles in his driveway. "You have absolutely no right to be on my property!" Jamal screamed, his voice echoing across the pristine neighborhood. "My lawyers are filing an emergency injunction right now. Get off my lawn before I have you all arrested for trespassing." The lead foreclosure agent, a burly man with a completely indifferent expression, calmly stepped onto the porch and handed Jamal a thick manila envelope. The injunction was denied at midnight. "Mr. Vance," the agent stated in a bored, monotone voice, "the Phoenix Trust holds the sole deed to this property due to absolute default. You have exactly 1 hour to remove your personal belongings from the premises before we change the locks. Anything left inside will become the property of the trust." Jamal snatched the envelope, tearing it open. He scanned the legal jargon, his eyes widening in sheer panic as he realized the paperwork was ironclad. He pulled out his phone and started dialing, frantically pacing back and forth across the manicured grass. He was calling his investors, his bank managers, his country club friends, begging for a sudden miracle wire transfer. Every single call went to voicemail. He was financially radioactive. The camera panned slightly, catching my mother Brenda sitting on the porch steps. She was surrounded by a mountain of designer luggage, clutching a fur coat to her chest. She was weeping hysterically, her makeup running down her face in dark streaks. She watched in absolute horror as a heavy-duty tow truck backed into the driveway. The driver hopped out and immediately began hooking heavy chains to the front axle of Kendra's custom $90,000 Porsche. Kendra stumbled out of the front door, completely catatonic. She watched the tow truck lift the front of her precious status symbol off the ground. She did not scream. She did not yell. The sheer shock of losing her entire fabricated identity in a matter of minutes had completely paralyzed her. She just stood there shivering in the cold, clutching a single designer handbag as if it were a life preserver. Neighbors in luxury cars began slowing down as they drove past the estate, rolling down their windows to stare at the commotion. The Golden family, the pinnacle of success and wealthy aesthetic, was being publicly humiliated and physically thrown onto the street. Down in the city, I set my espresso cup down and stood up from my leather chair. I looked at Richard Montgomery, who was straightening his custom silk tie. "It is time, Richard," I said, my voice completely steady. "Bring the car around." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the back seat of a massive jet black custom Maybach. The interior smelled of rich leather and absolute power. The privacy glass was tinted so dark that no one could possibly see inside. Richard sat across from me holding a leather briefcase containing the final eviction notices. I was no longer wearing my faded thrift store blazer. I was wearing a flawless, custom-tailored charcoal suit, paired with a crisp white silk blouse and pristine designer heels. I looked exactly like the multimillionaire I secretly was. The Maybach merged onto the highway, heading straight for the suburban estate. As we turned onto Jamal's Street, I could see the chaos from a block away. The tow truck had already departed with the Porsche. The locksmiths were actively drilling out the heavy brass locks on the massive front doors of the mansion. Our driver slowly turned the heavy Maybach into the circular driveway, the tires crunching softly against the gravel. We pulled right up to the front steps, completely dwarfing the foreclosure agent's vehicles. Through the tinted glass, I watched Jamal completely freeze. He stopped pacing. He lowered his cell phone from his ear. He stared at the gleaming black Maybach with a look of sudden, desperate hope. In his arrogant mind, there was only one logical explanation for a car of this magnitude arriving at his foreclosure. He assumed it was the mysterious billionaire owner of the Phoenix Trust. He assumed they had come to gloat, but more importantly, he assumed they had come to negotiate a last-minute deal to keep him in the house. Jamal spun around and violently snapped his fingers at his family. "Stop crying," he hissed at Kendra and Brenda, pointing at the massive car. "Wipe your faces right now. That is the owner of the trust. They came in person. We can fix this. Just stand up straight and look respectable." My mother scrambled to her feet, frantically wiping the black mascara streaks from her cheeks. She forced her mouth into a wide, painful-looking fake smile. Kendra stood up taller, brushing the wrinkles out of her sweatpants, trying desperately to project an aura of wealth, despite standing next to a pile of garbage bags filled with her shoes. Jamal quickly buttoned his pajama top, smoothing his hair back. He pasted on his best salesman smile, ready to grovel, ready to lie, ready to promise the absolute world to whoever stepped out of that car. They stood in a line on the porch, waiting to bow down to their financial savior. I looked at Richard, who gave me a sharp, respectful nod. I reached out and wrapped my hand around the polished chrome door handle. The time for hiding was completely over. It was time to introduce them to the new owner of their entire lives. I pulled the heavy chrome handle and pushed the door of the Maybach open. I stepped out onto the crushed gravel of the driveway. The cold winter wind immediately caught the edge of my custom-tailored charcoal suit jacket. Richard stepped out from the other side of the car, holding the thick leather briefcase containing their absolute ruin. We walked around the front of the massive vehicle and stood at the base of the porch steps. Jamal had his hand extended halfway through a practice greeting, but he completely froze. His fake salesman smile shattered into a million pieces. Kendra dropped her designer handbag onto the porch. Her jaw literally fell open as her eyes frantically scanned my expensive clothes and the corporate lawyers standing firmly behind me. My mother Brenda blinked rapidly, squinting through the harsh gray light, as if her eyes were playing tricks on her. Naomi Jamal stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "What are you doing in that car? Who is that with you?" I did not answer him right away. I slowly walked up the stone steps of the porch. The sharp click of my designer heels echoed loudly in the heavy silence. I stopped exactly 2 feet away from him. I looked at the man who had thrown $300 into a puddle of spilled wine and told me to scrub the floor. He looked incredibly small now, trembling in his silk pajamas. Richard stepped up beside me and opened the leather briefcase. He pulled out the final foreclosure execution document and handed it to me. I took the thick stack of papers and pressed them directly against Jamal's chest, forcing him to take them. "I did not just buy your debt, Jamal," I said, my voice ringing with absolute crystal-clear authority. "I bought the bank that owns your debt. This house belongs to the Phoenix Trust. My trust. You have exactly 1 hour to get off my property." Jamal looked down at the documents in his shaking hands. He flipped to the second page and saw my legal signature listed as the sole primary beneficiary and acting trustee of the corporation. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He staggered backward, hitting the brick pillar of the porch. He finally realized the terrifying truth. The broke sister he had tormented and mocked, the woman he had extorted for $1,000, had secretly been a multimillionaire the entire time. I had orchestrated his entire financial execution from the shadows. "You," Kendra gasped, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You are the Phoenix Trust. You did this to us. You took our house." "I did not take anything, Kendra," I replied coldly. "You spent years building a fake life on predatory loans. I simply called in the check. You dug this massive hole all by yourself. I just decided to stop throwing you a rope." Suddenly, my mother Brenda lunged forward. The absolute greed in her brain instantly rewired her entire reality. She saw the Maybach, she saw the custom suit, and she realized instantly who held the true wealth in the family. She shoved Kendra out of the way and reached her arms out toward me, her face breaking into a wide, desperate smile. "Naomi, my sweet, beautiful girl." Brenda cried out, her voice dripping with artificial love. "I always knew you were special. I always knew you were destined for absolute greatness. All that tough love I gave you was just to push you to reach your true potential. We are family, Naomi. We belong together." She stepped forward, trying to pull me into a tight embrace. I took a sharp step backward, putting my hand up to physically block her. I looked at the woman who had birthed me, feeling absolutely zero connection to her soul. "Do not touch me," I said, my voice dripping with absolute venom. "3 weeks ago, I begged you for $2,000 to save me from sleeping on the street. You looked me dead in the eyes and told me I was a dead investment. You told me I was a waste of space. You made your choice, Mom. You chose your golden child and her fake empire. Now you get to be homeless with her. Brenda let out a loud, dramatic sob, falling to her knees on the cold porch. Naomi, please, you cannot do this to your own mother. I do not have a mother, I stated flatly, looking down at her pathetic display. And you do not have a daughter. I turned to the lead foreclosure agent who had been watching the entire exchange in stunned silence. I pointed to the pile of designer luggage Brenda had stacked on the porch. If they are not completely off the perimeter of this estate in exactly 55 minutes, you have my full authorization to physically remove them, I instructed the agent. And throw that luggage into the street. It is blocking my view. Yes, ma'am, the agent replied immediately, stepping forward to enforce the perimeter. I looked at Jamal one last time. He was completely broken, staring blankly at the driveway where his luxury cars used to be. Enjoy the cheap highway motel, Jamal, I said smoothly. I hear they have rubber mats in the gym. Maybe you can sleep on the floor. I turned my back on them and walked down the porch steps. I did not look over my shoulder even as Kendra started screaming my name in pure hysterical desperation. The sound of her wailing was completely drowned out by the solid, heavy thud of the Maybach door closing behind me. I settled into the plush leather seat and Richard tapped the glass partition, signaling the driver. The massive car smoothly reversed out of the driveway, leaving my toxic family standing in the freezing cold, surrounded by the absolute wreckage of their own consequences. As the car rolled down the affluent suburban street, I looked out the tinted window and took a deep, clean breath. The crushing weight I had carried for 35 years was entirely gone. The slate was completely wiped clean. I had burned the rotten branches of my family tree to the ground. Now it was finally time to build something entirely new with the only person who had ever truly loved me. The days following the eviction moved with a swift and brutal efficiency. The Phoenix Trust had initiated the financial domino effect, but the federal government was the one who ultimately finished the job. Once Jamal's commercial loans officially defaulted, the banks began digging into his paperwork to see what assets they could salvage. What they found was a massive web of illegal cross-collateralization and forged property valuations. Within 2 weeks, a federal wire fraud investigation was opened. Jamal's passport was confiscated, and he is currently awaiting trial, facing decades in a federal penitentiary. His custom-tailored suits were completely traded in for a mountain of criminal legal fees he could not afford to pay. Kendra was forced to face a reality she had spent her entire adult life running from. With Jamal's assets frozen and her high-limit credit cards permanently canceled, her luxury influencer brand evaporated overnight. Her fake wealthy friends immediately abandoned her the second she could not pick up the tab at expensive restaurants. Left with absolutely no income and no education to fall back on, she had to swallow her towering pride. A mutual acquaintance told me that Kendra is currently working full-time at a mid-tier department store in the local mall. She spends 40 hours a week wearing a stiff polyester uniform, standing behind a cash register and ringing up the exact designer brands she used to pretend she owned. My mother Brenda tried desperately to rewrite the narrative. When she realized the depth of my wealth, she attempted to flood me with apologies. She sent dozens of frantic letters to my old apartment claiming she was blinded by Jamal and that she always loved me best. She tried calling from blocked numbers, leaving weeping voicemails about how family needs to stick together. I did not listen to a single one of them. I had Richard Montgomery and his legal team draft the most aggressive, ironclad cease and desist orders allowable by law. The boundaries were set in absolute stone. If Brenda, Kendra, or Jamal came within 500 feet of me or attempted to contact me in any way, they would be immediately arrested for harassment. I legally severed every single tie to the people who shared my blood. I became a ghost to them, completely untouchable and entirely free. 3 months later, the bitter winter had finally melted into a warm, bright spring. I was driving my new car down the winding coastal highway with Aunt Denise sitting in the passenger seat. I had told her we were simply taking a weekend trip to look at the ocean and have a nice seafood lunch. She was looking out the window, marveling at the crashing blue waves and the warm sunshine. I turned off the main highway and drove through a set of heavy wrought iron gates. We pulled up a long, winding driveway lined with towering palm trees. At the end of the driveway sat a breathtaking, fully paid off coastal estate. It was a massive, beautiful home with white pillars, a wraparound porch, and a private wooden walkway leading directly down to the pristine sandy beach. I parked the car and walked around to help Aunt Denise out. She stood in the driveway, looking up at the magnificent house with wide eyes. "Naomi, whose house is this?" Denise asked, her voice hushed with awe. "Are we trespassing, baby?" I smiled, linking my arm through hers and gently guiding her up the front steps. We walked onto the massive porch where you could hear the soothing, rhythmic sound of the ocean waves crashing against the shore. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out a thick white envelope. There was no clear packing tape on this one. It was pristine and heavy. I placed the envelope into her rough, calloused hands, just like she had done for me at the park all those months ago. "This is your house, Aunt Denise," I said softly, watching her eyes widen in pure shock. "It is entirely paid off. The deed is in your name. There is also a dedicated trust fund set up for you that will cover the property taxes, the maintenance, and your living expenses for the rest of your life." Denise opened the envelope with trembling fingers. She pulled out the official property deed, seeing her own name printed clearly at the top. She looked at the paper and then looked up at me, completely unable to process what was happening. "I cannot take this, Naomi," she whispered, tears rapidly filling her eyes. "This is millions of dollars. You need to save your money." I gently placed my hands over hers. "You are never going to work another double shift at that diner again, Aunt Denise," I told her, my own eyes welling with happy tears. "You are never going to worry about a mortgage. And next Tuesday you are flying first class to New York to meet with the absolute best orthopedic surgeon in the country. Your knee replacement is fully funded. You get to rest now. You finally get to just live." Aunt Denise collapsed into my arms, sobbing with a profound, bone-deep relief. It was the sound of a woman laying down a heavy burden she had carried for over 40 years. We stood on the porch of her new estate, holding each other as the warm ocean breeze washed over us. Later that evening, I stood alone on the back deck, leaning against the wooden railing and looking out at the endless expanse of the dark ocean. People always say that winning the lottery changes you. They say that sudden wealth ruins families and turns people into monsters. But as I stood there listening to the waves, I realized that was a complete lie. Money does not change anybody. It simply removes their masks. It gives people the power and the freedom to finally act exactly how they want to act, without any fear of consequence. My mother and my sister did not turn evil because I got rich. They were always toxic. They were always cruel. The money just gave me the absolute clarity to see their true faces and the power to finally walk away. Blood makes you related, but loyalty and sacrifice make you family. Sometimes the most empowering thing you can do in your entire life is to look at the people who share your DNA and realize you owe them absolutely nothing. Family should be a sanctuary, not a prison you have to buy your way out of. If you had the power to buy the truth, would you be brave enough to look at it? Thank you for listening to my story. Please hit the like button and subscribe if you believe in setting boundaries, protecting your peace, and having the courage to walk away from anyone who does not recognize your true worth.